now. So let's call the meeting to order. Thanks, everyone, for your patience. And I might turn this over to you, Kip?
Me first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Take it away, Dave.
So thank you, Mayor. Really appreciate the opportunity and appreciate the council's time this morning. I will start off by saying how pleased I am with the progress that we've made. As you can probably tell, just in terms of putting on this type of session is a lot of work by many people. But more holistically, the progress we've made as an organization and as a city, we've said that we're going to be relentless in our work on this, and we have been, and we will continue to be relentless in this work. I really appreciate the hard work that everyone's put into this effort, because it's not just the study session, as I mentioned, but the work that all of our team does is outside their normal jobs. And they need to fit the work into everything else that they're doing. So special thanks to Kip and Lee and Ray for leading this, and Ray's team, and Rosario and the communications team, and in all the departments and work that they do leading up to being prepared for events that we may face in the future. I think that all of that hard work builds and leads to trust. Trust in us that we're going to be there for our community. And so really appreciate this opportunity. As you can see, a lot of the staff have different color vests on. And really, when it comes to this work, it's a lot about the roles that we play in these types of events. And they're different than the roles that we play in our daily jobs. And we've been extremely strategic about how we play these roles. My role has changed over time. Kip and Lee have taken on the leadership role in these functions, and it's been very strategic and thoughtful in the way we've done it. Today, we will be very focused on the role of the mayor and the council, and making sure that we're providing you all the support you need to be successful in your critical roles that you play when we have events that face our community. So thank you once again for this opportunity, and I'm turning it over to Kip to lead us through today's session.
Thank you, Dave. Good morning, everyone. Kip Harkness, Deputy City Manager. I'm also one of the two directors of the Emergency Operations Center. I'm not wearing the vest today because there can be only one, and that is going to be Lee for the exercises today. We will explain a little bit about what you're seeing, but it's essentially a reduced version of an Emergency Operations Center up in the U here, with each vest representing a different section. And then behind are the folks who are in Department Operations Centers or Incident Commanders and are closer to the actions in the field. So you kind of move from a strategic to an operational to a tactical perspective as we get farther away from the council here. So we will give you a sense of what it's like to operate and run an emergency operations center in a major scenario. Before that, we will dive into a sense of what we've done in the last year, and one of the ways that we're framing the role of the council members through the district disaster offices. I will be, with your permission, Mr. Mayor, I will be playing the facilitator role both back and forth, so I'll be moving around a bit here, and we'll make sure that these sessions are highly interactive so that you'll be able to engage with us as we talk. The one thing I want to add before we go into a review of what's happened in the last year is, what is the role of emergency management? There is a great deal of technical way to talk about this. There's a great deal of training that goes into this. As I was thinking about it over the last several weeks, and I think this visual displays that very well, I think the essence of the role of emergency management is to bring out the best in the people of our city when the situation of our city is at its worst, right? So it really is a people function and an enablement function, not only of the people in the city of the organization, but the whole community. And you see here as well many community members who would play an active role in a response or be part of it. And so really what we're trying to do is create a way to orchestrate and encourage the very best of our people in the city when the situation in the city is at its worst. And by definition, when the event is something that we don't do on a regular basis, and we may only do once and never do again. So it's very improvisational, and it has to be very specific to each event. And that's why we've created a structure here that isn't the normal departmental structure, but is one that is flexible, expandable, scalable, and can be improvised and adjusted as needed on the fly. So we'll talk a little bit more of that. Ray and I will play the role of facilitators. Each of the folks at the table and in the Department Operations Centers will be introduced as we go. So I will turn it over now to Ray to review the last year and some of the key activations that we've had.
Thanks, Kip. Catch up on the slides here. So the intent of my discussion here at this moment is to talk about our last 4 activations and to provide some perspective. This is the most number of activations we've had in over 2 decades with the events that we've had, and I'll talk about the first one, the College Football Playoff, our Flood Watch in February, as well as the PSPS events. I'll do this fairly quickly. The most PS would be the public safety power shutoffs. And what I really want to point out is that, as Kip indicated, each one of these were unique. Each one of them had their own operational tempo. But what's important to point out is the flexibility and the dynamics that go on during these types of events. So the first event was a college football playoff. Now we activated as a precautionary effort to be ready, leaning forward if an incident occurred during the college football playoff. With law enforcement, with economic development, and many other departments, there was a lot of planning for a whole year to get ready for this. And our focus was to make sure that the entertainment value of the people that are coming to the entertainment had a good time in a safe environment. The EOC was activated, the Emergency Operations Center was activated for 2 shifts. And we did that purposely to start training, to show more dynamics and give more operations and activity on how we put together what's called an action plan. And the hallmark event, which took place on Sunday, was the concert. The concert down in the Discovery Meadow area. And what was very important is that night, the night before, there was a significant storm that came in. High winds, heavy rain. It was causing some infrastructure damage in terms of the ground in Discovery Meadow, but most importantly, all the screens that were up were high. They were supported, but we had up to 60-mile-an-hour winds coming through, and there was grave concern that we would have to take action and protect the public. So very quickly, even though we were in a virtual EOC setup, I was remote. I set up a conference call with economic development, with the promoter, with the National College Football Playoff leadership, with our EOC directors on the phone, with public safety on the phone as well. And we walked through the process of learning what the conditions were. Unfortunately, it led to cancellation, the College Football Playoff, and the promoter canceled the concert because it would be too unsafe. That's an example of our operations. We can be flexible, dynamic, bring in the right players, not just our departments, but the other decision makers out in the community as well. And that was a very valuable experience. The next event was our storm watch. These 2 pictures depict how quickly the water rises and drops. These are within 5 hours of each other, these pictures, and you can see it dropped almost 8 feet in terms of depth because it rose quickly and came down. We did a couple things differently that we've never done before. Is we set up a situation room here at City Hall, brought in team players, made some assessments, started calling with the Water District, as well as National Weather Service, making sure we understood what we were seeing in terms of the measurements, in terms of what we see online, and also what the Water District was providing us information on. So we did activate our EOC. We did call for an evacuation. We did activate volunteers. We did communicate with the council members that were affected in that area, or the area affected. And then we made sure that we had people out door knocking. We had our alert warning system out there working, as well as the alert SEC system. And most importantly, we activated our joint emergency action plan with the Water District, and the Water District was in our EOC, helping us make these decisions. So bringing in the right players, very important in the Emergency Operations Center. As it came to the public safety power shutoffs. This is a very unusual situation for us. In 3 months' time, we put together a power vulnerability plan. We spent some time exercising and training prior to the EOC activation. And on October 9th, obviously, we activated the EOC. And our primary purpose was for communicating with the public, so we can demonstrate we were paying attention, we were coordinating, we were prepared to take response as needed during the response activities. The focus then was keeping PG&E accountable, but also taking their information and making it understandable. That was an important part for us, is we had to sort of translate what PG&E was saying so the public could understand it. It increased our capability and collaboration with the county. Public information capability was significant in getting the word out. We were tremendously successful in getting the word out. We also were able to develop technology on the run thanks to our GIS staff and the Public Works Department, creating something unique that would address our concerns as well as provide better public messaging. It also increased our messaging with the council in terms of letting you know and keeping you informed of what the actions were. And that carried over into the second event, which allowed us even to take it another step further and have multi-language media briefings so that the public could understand it in their own language as well. That was a very important link and step up in our capabilities. It also provided us the ability to use the information and the processes we developed in the first event. We were able to amplify those and improve them and tweak them a little bit more, just so that they were that much more effective. So that's a quick review of the 4 events that we've had just this calendar year. Just demonstrate the need, intent, organization of the EOC, and our effectiveness. Back to you, Kip.
Thank you, Ray. So one of the principles around emergency management is sort of this dunk and dry philosophy. Dunk in the actual exercise of the work and then dry off and learn from it. So we're in a constant action reflection mode. In some cases literally dunk, in some cases literally dry. So we're gonna mirror that here today, and we're gonna kind of dunk and dry a little bit with you all. So the dunks have been these 4 incidents. If we could go back to the slide that has the 4. I'd like you to kind of reel yourself back to ancient history, back in 2018, and think about, as council members, some of the fears that you had, or concerns that you had related to things like the college football playoff, or the potential of flooding, or the power safety shutoffs, which we didn't even know about back in 2018. And I'll ask you 2 questions. One will be some of the fears or concerns you have. And then really the second thing that I'll dive into after that is helping understand what is the best thing that the EOC staff did or that we did that was supportive of you. Because part of what management is catching people doing something right. And I want to make sure if we've done something well that we amplify, we train on that. You can also critique us on things that we didn't do. That's fine. We're not shy about that. But I'd like you to think about 2 things. Some fears that you had going into these incidents, and as you went through them, something that worked well that you want us to continue to do or do better. So I'm going to open it up popcorn style to any of the council members who would like to reflect on that. Fears and something that this team did well.
Okay.
Councilmember Foley.
Since you started the time. Kip, since you started the timing at 2018, I have to admit I wasn't here, so I didn't have any fears, although as someone coming into the office, the fear would be, are we prepared for any type of disaster? And that could be a terrorist attack, it could be an earthquake, it could be PG&E shutdown. But having been here for the other 3, the 4 items in 2019, I was really impressed with our maps. With the PG&E power shutdown, we had better maps than anyone. The media alerts and the talking points that we had were exceptional. We were able to use that information and tweet it out and send it out in any social media. So I would say the contact that you had with our communication staff was excellent.
Thank you.
Kip, why don't we just go around the room?
That sounds great. It's working that way. So let's start with you, Councilmember Campos.
Well, I was here, and I was here for the Super Bowl 50 as well, and I don't know, this might be a critique, but I felt like we were not as organized for the college playoffs as we were for the Super Bowl. It felt, the Super Bowl, we had like people positioned outside the airport. I mean, the security felt like incredibly tight in the city. And around the college football time, I was like, I'm hoping things are going well, and it did go well. I wasn't aware of things maybe, and maybe we should be more aware as council members of some of the security measures being implemented. Not that we have to go blab what they are, but it just would have been nice to know that we were organized. And I'm not saying that we weren't. I'm just saying we didn't know.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and I don't necessarily want to speak on behalf of the police department, but I would say they were definitely there. So, Chief, anything you want to add on that?
Sure. So, obviously with Super Bowl, that was an extremely large event for us. And certainly the messaging, I think, from that standpoint and everything that we had going with the Super Bowl, I think was messaged probably a lot better. We used the exact same template for the college games that were going on because obviously we recognized that the city was more of a host to the college teams and the crowds that were going with it, whereas Super Bowl, because of the city of Santa Clara and the city of San Francisco, maybe a little less. But we just maybe didn't message it as good. We were certainly prepared. We certainly had all staff, and it was all staff. And
I want to
people on
caveat and say that I did not feel unsafe because I
Right,
was
no,
down, I just underinformed, not unsafe. I just
Right,
wanna be clear.
and optics are reality in this game. So part of it is how do we communicate what we're doing in addition to what we're doing. Yeah. Did we do anything right, sir?
Of course, nothing happened. It was great. Anytime where we can-
anything that particularly worked for you and our communications, our work with your office through any of these events that you would like to highlight?
Yeah, well, the PG&E things that have happened, we were on it. I just felt, I thought we were doing a better job than PG&E and some of the other organizations. I just thought we were on it. And I have nothing but compliments, especially because my district was one of the hit districts. And we were much more organized than I've ever noticed. So for the PG&E things, I thought we were working with all cylinders.
Thank you. Councilmember Carrasco.
Sure. So I'll just mention, I guess, the natural disaster and the not so natural, the shut-off. And my biggest concern has been just the fact that I have a very diverse district, many different languages, different levels of education. And one of the biggest fears is getting the correct information out, but making sure that our folks have access. I mean, we've been working on getting Wi-Fi into people's homes because we know that in my district, a lot of folks are still not connected. So there's a lot of fear even now for me, figuring out how to get the correct information out in a timely manner. In terms of the shut-off, I will say I was on many of those conference calls, and I appreciate the ongoing communication. It allowed my staff to know how to pivot and change directions if we needed to. I was disappointed that PG&E didn't have quite the most accurate maps up. So we thought that many more, tens of thousands of folks in my district were going to be impacted when they weren't. It's great that they were prepared, but it does send almost like a rippling effect of panic when it's not necessary. So making sure that, again, going back to having the correct information in a timely manner and making sure that my district, and of course in the rest of the city, but folks who don't usually have access to the mainstream forms of communication, that we figure out how we're going to get that information out to them.
So lots of layers on the communication, both the right language, the right medium, making sure they're connected, that it's timely, all of that, those layers of the complexity that are
Yeah,
important.
and like I
in
said,
communication.
during that first shut-off, because it was the bigger one, I really appreciated being part of those conference calls. It allowed us to just be able to get out there and prepare the community. I do want to say that there was a couple of suggestions you pushed back very gently but firmly, and I was really mad at you. And, but I got over it because I understood afterwards where you were coming from, and what I was asking maybe was a little bit unreasonable. But it did come out of fear for my district, and for the neighboring districts. I'm in between 4 and 8, so that entire area of the foothills is going to be highly impacted. And so I may push again, and hopefully we can figure out what is reasonable and what's not reasonable, and be able to just get on the same page. But I appreciate your firmness.
Well, thank you for that. We find those conversations extremely valuable, right? One of the roles that you all play is being tightly connected to the community in a way that we never are. So you understand, see, and know things that we will not. And so bringing those questions up, many of the questions that you had are ones that I'd had and debated with police and others. And so that really was a great opportunity for us to learn from you, adjust what we did, and also explain to you why we can't or weren't doing a particular thing. So I would double down on the keep it up.
Thank you.
Councilmember Jimenez.
Thank you. So I'll just go through a few of these. There's a few things that come to mind. The college football playoffs, I mean, certainly that's downtown, and I'm in the far-flung reaches of the city, practically in Morgan Hill. And so what came to mind for me when we're working on that is just simply some of the fears that I had is that there would be some type of event involving shootings or whatever it may be with large crowds and such. And I wasn't really keeping up with a lot of what was being done, but as Johnny said, nothing happened, so I assume things worked out. which is a good thing. Flood watch. One of the things about flood watch, certainly one of the fears is flooding that we've seen in the past. I'm not sure I would categorize this next comment as a critique, but Coyote Creek runs through my district as well, right? And we're probably the closest community to Anderson Dam as it relates to San Jose, and so. What I desire is just a little bit more information as to that potential impact to my community. And I don't know if it was part and parcel what was happening there, but I think that's always sort of a frame of mind for me is what do we do in a situation if there's a failure at Anderson Dam, for example, right? And I'm not sure we've had those conversations, but I'd really much appreciate having those conversations at some point.
That's a really good point. There are things that are very, very impactful on your district. Anderson Dam is one of those, and I saw staff taking note in terms of both connecting back with you and the larger council as a whole on that. That's a really excellent point that you raise.
And then the power safety shutoffs, to dovetail with or tie into the comments made by Councilmember Foley, just the accuracy of the maps and the information. It was very timely. I very much appreciated that. I'm sure we all felt, or I felt specifically, and I'm sure it was shared by other folks, and it seemed like there was just a moving target. And we were just trying to follow and disperse and disseminate as much information as possible. One of my biggest concerns with that is obviously the shutoffs and how they were going to impact. We have a lot of retirees from IBM and such that go retire in the suburbs and such. And so to the extent many of those folks, if we were going to be able to identify many of the folks that were maybe using machines and things of that nature, right? And I know PG&E was doing their part, but I don't have much faith in that company at the present time. And so I was very concerned as to how we as a city were going about identifying those homes and those individuals that really needed the power.
Yeah, and we've broadened that conversation into the larger conversation around access and functional needs, right? Everybody from folks who speak languages other than English as their first language to folks who are mobile in different ways than we are, folks who have medical issues, and making sure that we, on every aspect of every hazard, are intentional of thinking and working around that issue. And I think one of the things that we learned through that in particular was there's a saying in the community, nothing about us without us. And so what we found we wanted to do is bring in people who have access and functional needs to help us think through and lead that. So it's not our assumptions about another community, it's the community helping us understand how to support them in the way that they need to be supported. So it brought up a lot of issues, exactly like you're relating. And I think, yeah, we cannot and should not put our trust on any individual private company to do what we need to do to support our residents in that regard.
Correct, and just the very last thing, the power safety shutoffs is the use of generators was a fear for me. We're actually out, amongst the foothills and such, and so the use of generators, potential to ignite fires and such was a big concern, and I'm not exactly sure how we were monitoring that or what we were doing, but I'm sure we were watching.
Thank you, Councilmember. Mr. Mayor.
Just my experience with the flood watch was really positive. I went out with a team of volunteers, and first, the volunteer management was really excellent. It was really paint by numbers for us as volunteers when we were knocking on doors. I went out there with actually a lot of city employees and former city employees, and we had a lot of Spanish speakers, which I thought was great, because we knew along that part of the Guadalupe there was at least one neighborhood where we knew there was going to be a significant number of Spanish speakers. So that was really excellent to see how we could deploy folks quickly, and the residents were pretty appreciative, even though we were waking a lot of them up to let them know about what was going on. The PSPS event, I feel like one of the big lessons we've learned in all this is we look at the work that the Public Works team did to really design superior maps, as Councilmember Foley mentioned, and also design that fantastic crowdsourcing app that helped us understand exactly where the lights were really going off, which again ensured that we had better information than PG&E did. There was a prior incident that I won't refer to directly, but it happened in 2017, and it rhymes with mud, where we relied really heavily on another agency because we believed rightfully that they were the experts, and we got really, really bad information from them. And I feel like the lesson we learned this time was, hey, all that information is helpful, but we need to go get our own because we're closer to the problem and we're going to understand it, particularly if we can leverage the observations of the community. And so I think we really applied that lesson incredibly well with the power safety shutoff events. I was very impressed at how the fire department was quickly identifying and with the rest of the team, those who were medically vulnerable because they were relying on respirators and other medical equipment, and we were going out there and knocking on doors, literally, when frankly that wasn't happening with PG&E and other agencies. And finally, that October 26th press conference I thought was a really positive one, and I'm hoping we can replicate that again, where we had Lund Yep speaking Vietnamese, Magdalena Carrasco speaking Spanish. We were talking to the entire, or as much of the community as we possibly could. Would have liked to have seen actually more Vietnamese media show up, for example, so we'd be communicating more clearly in those channels. But I'm hoping that that's a model we can replicate as well. And also very quick response, when we reached out to the team saying, hey, we really need to do a press conference because people have a lot of uncertainty. The response was, okay, we'll get together. I think we did one early Saturday morning, if I recall, and everybody scrambled into place over at the police headquarters when I know folks were focusing on a lot of other things at that moment. Appreciate how quickly folks were mobilizing when we all agreed it's time for a press conference.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Vice Mayor.
Okay, I got two mics, huh? I'll steal one. So my biggest concern or fear actually is probably the same fear that all residents have, and that's the fear of the unknown. But I want to say that the positive aspect is that based on the work that was done before Ray got here, and then all the great work that Ray Reardon has done since he's been here, as well as the rest of his team, I think that we've been able to build on that. So when we're going into the college football playoffs or the flood watch or the PSPS, that foundation was there. And I felt like we were learning from every experience, and that feedback loop was building on itself, and it enabled us to respond and react and communicate and get the word out and have the press conferences and the maps and all those other elements that I think made for a very responsive action to the community, getting the word out and informing them and keeping them abreast of what's going on. So all of that was extremely positive for me, and I'm looking forward to building on that and constantly improving. So that's the positive aspects.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. Councilmember Esparza.
Thank you. So like Councilmember Foley, I wasn't here in 2018, but my fears were based on the Coyote Creek flood, right? And so my fears were based in not having multilingual outreach or materials, in my community, a high immigrant community, a lot of distrust or a difficult relationship with government, a very low-income community. So one of my fears was if people were displaced in any way, where could they go? So what I think went well, especially in the flood watch, actually all along the board, is with a new team in place, and thank you, Ray and Kip, for your leadership on this issue, having a multilingual outreach, and especially as part of the flood, and then with the power shutoffs, we had to move very quickly, and the press conferences with council members or staff speaking different languages, putting out materials in different languages as quickly as possible so that partners can also get the word out, right? I think media outreach went really well because, again, we need everybody else to keep sharing that information. And so I thought that was really great and effective. And the fact that we as a city, in the power shutoff especially, took ownership of it, because we're sort of where the rubber meets the road in the community. And so the fact that the city made our own GIS maps, the fact that we took our own photos, that we worked together to go out and fly over and take photos so we knew exactly what neighborhoods were out. I thought that was something really to be proud of as a city. Also, the EOC activation, the fact that we moved sooner rather than later, there was a real sense of just action. Let's sort of, let's get on it, and then let's stop and reflect and learn, and then take more action. That was very effective. And then lastly, particularly with the flood watch, because I was a new council member, and again, my experience was based on the Coyote Creek flood, it was really great to see coordination with the water district and good communication. And if somebody didn't know something, they picked up the phone and they got on it. And so that was really good to see. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Davis.
Yeah, I think some of the things the other council members have said were what my concerns were. I wasn't as concerned about college football playoffs because I was pretty heavily involved with that, and I had assurances that, oh, we've done this before. We did this for Super Bowl. Like, we have a playbook, and we're just activating the playbook, which put me at ease. In terms of the flood watch, I was less at ease because it was a new playbook, and we had a negative experience in the past. But the phrase that came up for me, and you said it to me often, Kip, when I think we activated twice for a flood watch within the same week or something like that, out of an abundance of caution. So you said we're activating out of abundance of caution, and then I think you called me in the middle of the night or very wee hours of the morning. Out of an abundance of caution, it looks like the riverbank might overflow, so we're going to evacuate X area. And I thought that was just, it was great to have that. There was not, I think one of the other council members used confusion or fear of the unknown, and the vice mayor said that, and we didn't have that. It was decisive, and it was communicated well and consistently across, not just to me, but also to my residents, which was really important. So I actually wasn't worried about the power shutoffs because of that, because we had that experience in the spring. So yeah, I just think you guys have completely changed in terms of, I think, whether or not we activated the EOC on time in 2017. I don't know, it wasn't in my district, but it seemed like there was a lot more, dithering is the best word that I can come up with for that, as opposed to in February, it was decisive. We're activating the EOC. We may not need it, but we'd better have it. You know, I'm going to call you at this time and this time and this time, and that's what happened. And I felt like everybody was updated when they needed to be. And I pushed whatever I knew, I pushed out on social media. And it also, I think it was good because I had one resident who lived in that area who I know personally, and she kept messaging me, even when you had said, it looks like it's gonna overflow, we're having people evacuate, and she had known from the day before that that might happen. At 5 a.m., she's like, well, what am I gonna do with my car? What am I gonna do with my cats? And I'm like, this is why we do it before it actually overflows, because people panic in the moment and they need that extra time. And so that was the thing that brought home to me that the out of abundance of caution is exactly where we need to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Diep.
I'm sorry, what is the prompt? What are we sharing?
The prompt is, what is your fear or concern if you were to reel yourself back to 2018 around emergency management? And then what is one thing that, in your experience of these 4 incidences, was something that worked for you, worked for your staff in the way that this team responded or managed that incident?
Yeah, so, I mean, I first started on council when we had the 2017 thing that rhymes with mud. So I was kind of just, experiencing all that as it happened. I think my, not complaint, but my issue in that time period was things were happening, and I felt that I would have press people come to me and ask about stuff that I didn't even know about. So I felt that as a council member, of course things go through the mayor's office, but as the council and as a face of the city, we should have been briefed more on the latest and happenings, even though the flood did not happen in my district per se. So that was one thing that I gave feedback on. But in terms of the 4 on the slide here, I think, since we had Ray come and you guys step up and reorganize, I feel much more in the loop. If anything, I feel in the power safety shut-off recently, if anything, we kind of potentially overshared because we were sent, like 3 or 4 updates a day, which is great because people want to know what's happening, except, I would say like 98% of every update was basically a rehash of the last email. And at a certain point, like, it almost encourages people to oh, I don't need to read this email, this 5th one, because it's probably just the same thing, but it's that 5th one that may have the thing that says get out now. So I don't know how to strike a balance between that, but if anything, just say, no new update, and then just refer to last email or something, as opposed to copy and pasting the same, here's the latest, which is the same as the last email. I echo the mayor's comment about, the lack of Vietnamese involvement. And that's nothing the city can do, but, we put out the press releases and we call for people, and if they don't come to, cover the press conference or get the information, that's on them. But I'm happy to work with your office and staff to kind of reach out and encourage ethnic media, Vietnamese media, to pay more attention to these things, because it is important. And I was pleased, when I was following the Twitter feeds of the city, to see the videos from city staffs speaking and giving out alerts in Spanish and Vietnamese. I thought that was pretty cool. So those were my immediate thoughts.
Thank you. I'm going to let that stand as those comments, and we're going to go now to Ann Tran, who's going to come and talk about one of the ways that we're conceptualizing you all being engaged in this increasingly formally, which is through the disaster district office. The only framing comment I'll make on this is very much a work in progress and a work in process. And so part of what we're looking for here is not only to present the information to you, but feedback from you to make it better and to clarify it and to make it work for us in our San Jose way. So with that, I'll turn over to Ann, who's met, I think, with each and all of you, every one of you, to talk about this in more detail.
Good morning. My role in the city is to connect the community to the resources that we need, so that together we can better prepare for an emergency and, more importantly, be able to recover after a major disaster. And I can't think of a better resource to talk about today than you, the city council members, and the disaster district office. Since coming on since 2008, 2 months into my employment with the city, I came before you and told you all about what a great idea it would be to have an office in your district during a disaster. We later branded it the Disaster District Office, with the conviction that knowledge and information is powerful because it can save lives during a disaster, we started by working together to build district summaries of each and every one of your districts. And we got to better understand the unique characteristics and the needs of your communities. And what we found in this graph here, on the right side, you've established an extensive network with your residents, with the faith-based organizations in your district, healthcare facilities, schools, and you use multiple platforms, whether it be phone listservs or emails, neighborhood leadership groups, social media, WeChat, Twitter, even WhatsApp. We realized that during disasters, when emergency public information needs to be amplified throughout the city, we can leverage your list of contacts to get information out to the residents faster. And this empowers our residents with the important information that they need, which can save their lives. Likewise, the Emergency Operations Center also needs real-world information to guide response operations and make informed decisions. The DDO works to close this critical gap and feeds the information from the community back to the Emergency Operations Center. So taking your feedback from our first study session, we've partnered with the library to develop key and access protocols for your disaster district offices and worked with your staff to develop an operational plan. And then we started to initiate site walkthroughs and even mock activations to include the library staff who will be providing logistical support during your disaster district operations. And lastly, we managed to provide language access services so that in your disaster district operations, you have interpretation services and American Sign Language services to help you disseminate information. With that said, the function of the disaster district office isn't confined or shouldn't be confined to just a physical location. As Ray has mentioned in the last 4 EOC activations, the City Council and especially the mayor has already carried out the core functions of the disaster district office, which is getting important information out to the community, whether it's through translation services or pushing information out through social media. And I'm glad to say that we've come a long way, and we are the first city to really try to bring this concept to life. And you are supporting an entire system of emergency operations that you will learn more about in the next section, working together to serve our community. And in summary, the disaster district office serves as the conduit of information between the community and the Emergency Operations Center, as well as a powerful force multiplier for disseminating life-saving information out to our community. And your work supports the EOC in its efforts to enable our first responders, our field staff, and our incident commanders to do what they do best, which is keeping our lives safe and keeping emergency operations going. And with that, I want to thank you and your staff for all of the support and commitment that you've given to this entire process, whether it's rearranging your entire day to test out key access with me, or taking up an entire table on a holiday at a Starbucks to validate information, and most recently, standing in front of a freezing parking lot to hear me emphasize the importance of sign-in sheets. So with this graph, you've seen this before. We go through this every time that we meet. And this shows that your disaster district office spans the entire continuum of the emergency operation, the emergency activation levels, whether it's in preparedness, in supporting the CERT program in your community, getting your community members prepared, and getting trained yourselves, or in the warning level where an entire emergency operation is fully staffed. So you have a critical role in ratifying the proclamation of local emergency, but you also owe it to your community to make legislative and policy considerations, which has consequential impacts to our city. And with that, I want to thank you for your support and hand this back over to Kip.
Thank you. We're going to get some feedback on this. I'm going to sort of modeling the same conversation that Councilmember Carrasco and I had. So there's two easy parts, one hard part in this 3 bullet point slide. One is the real value that you play as a conduit of information to us. You see and know things we don't know and we never will, and that is invaluable to us, invaluable to us. The force multiplier, the second point about getting the information out, also extremely valuable. The last one is the one that sometimes I would imagine if I were in your shoes is actually the one that's hardest. Because the community is looking to you as if you are going to be making things happen exactly the way they want to, and you're not the incident commander, you're not the first responder, and you're not the EOC director. And I think that has got to be a very difficult situation for you to be in, because at that moment, some arcane explanation of how an emergency operations center works to a community member must be very difficult. But it's also one of the ones that I want to stress, because I think the district disaster office, wherever it's located, works best when we understand all 3 of these. And if we don't, that's where it really becomes complicated for us and you. So Ann said it nicely. I'll be a little more candid and direct. That's one of the things I think must be hardest as an election official, is that line between dealing with the actual pain of the community and not being able to be the incident commander or the first responder. So I'll say that. And then what I'd like to ask at this point is, this is a new concept that we are evolving. I would love feedback from anybody on the council who has suggestions on how we might strengthen or improve this approach and process. Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Kip. Just going to the point that I made about our networks within our districts, I think it's really important for you to put the work on us really specifically. And by that, I mean, for example, we think about mass care facilities and where we would need them in our districts. I think while I was a council member, I think I could name the pastor at every church and the rabbi at every synagogue, because you're there all the time. Really being able to identify each and every person at one of those facilities, as well as the principal at every school, because we know those gyms and those churches become really important during a disaster, when you need a facility where people are comfortable actually coming to and to be safe. So those kinds of things where the council offices can provide and update data about the key points of contact for the major facilities and communities, and obviously each of those individuals is themselves an important connector to the community as well. I think that would be really important to get us in the game of really contributing as a force multiplier.
Right, so to understand which facility is actually going to work given the needs, given the community in a particular case, and who we should be reaching out to and connecting with, and doing that not as we're informing you later, but as in seeking out your input as we're making those decisions.
Yeah, literally getting the cell number of every person with each of those institutions, so we all know how to get a hold of them.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Other feedbacks for improving this process or approach? I'll let you.
Okay. So again, It's okay. So again, sort of my experience is based on being a community member who's very active in the flood response. In fact, we were both there. And so I wanted to preface this actually with saying I love the district idea, the district disaster office. I think it's a really good idea. My critique would be, it was presented to me as, this is where it is, take it or leave it, as far as the location. And my answer is, we're going to go wherever we need to go in the event of a disaster. And so I think it's important to remember that we need to plan for multiple locations, because it very much, the thing, I think what you said is so profound, because in a disaster, you sort of have to be comfortable with the unknown, because you're not really going to know everything. You have to work with the information that you have at the time. And as you keep going, you learn a little bit more. And so we should be looking at multiple locations within a district, because especially with the geography of some of our districts, it could make a big difference. And the one site that has sort of been chosen may not be the best site, and in fact, it may not be a city-owned facility, right? And so I just wanted to bring that up for geographical balance, but also for community. And I realize this isn't an issue in everybody's district, but in my district, again, given the political climate, people are afraid to go to church. They're actually afraid to get food assistance. So there's a big chasm between particularly the population that we need to reach the most, that's so vulnerable in a disaster, and the government, right? And I say that in quotes. And so we, in some cases, we may need to partner with a third party. It might be a school district. It might be a faith-based organization. It might be a nonprofit. It might even be a business, depending on what that business might be. And so I think we need to be open to that moving forward and just ultimately know that we may sort of pre-select some sites. We may pre-position even some basic equipment, but ultimately we're going to respond with the flexibility that's needed in the time of a disaster. So that's
Thank you. I
my
want to
one
take
main
that, I
point.
want to give a direct response to that, but I suspect there may be some additional perspective on, related to that. Councilmember Foley, if I could give you that opportunity. I think there's a mic here in front of you.
Thank you, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the the disaster district office and Councilmember Esparza, your comments, because I share them. Our role as the council member is not to interfere with the first responders and the operations of the emergency centers. Our job is to be the leaders in our district and to instill calm and empathy and understanding and communication. And the best way to do that is not to be off-site necessarily at this location that isn't connected to where emergency services are going to be held. If the Red Cross is going to be somewhere, that's where I want to be to talk to people and find out what's going on, because we're collecting data for you, and if we have information, there's 10 people who are saying the same thing, that would be a helpful piece for you. But if we're off-site, we're not going to get that information as easily. We're going to be a conduit via phone. We're not going to be connected. I'm going to have a staff sitting around not really doing much, when we could be more interactive and showing our involvement, our awareness, how we are responding to the disaster itself. And this could be any disaster that we're talking about. Having been through the Loma Prieta earthquake as I'll call myself a survivor then, at that time, you never know what's gonna happen. But we lost everything, and where we ended up was a local school where the Red Cross was there, and every other organization who could help us, FEMA eventually was there too. They all were there to benefit us, and I remember this was in the hills, Summit Road, so you've got a little school district and a council person responding, and it just instills some sense of strength to you that there are other people there who are in charge. Not that we're making decisions. I don't want to. Don't get me. I'm not making a decision, but I want to be able to report to you and be more effective that way.
Thank you.
Does that help?
It does. Councilmember Camus, did you have something you want to add on that particular line?
Yeah, I mean, not all disasters are the same, and I agree with Maya. I mean, if we had a flood and the disaster relief, the disaster office is in the floodplain, I can understand us looking at different sites. And not all disasters, I don't know, I think we are planning well for earthquakes, fires, and what have you, but in the news every day I hear about the disease, like the coronavirus, and I'm shocked about how fast the Chinese government is able to erect entire hospitals. And I'm wondering if we're planning for that type of disaster.
There'll be an info memo coming out today if it hasn't already gone out. We have a small team working on the coronavirus. We have already in coordination with the county public health on this, and have had a series of meetings over the weekend. An, who has a background in epidemiology, has been coordinating our information and has pushed back on the county to make sure that their information is available in multiple languages. We've offered to assist on that, and we are developing a plan with a short checklist that will scale us up should there become an actual incident in the coronavirus.
And we're building a hospital now within Lake Park.
Everything except what he said. So I'd like to take a moment to directly respond to the points that were made. Please.
I had one more thing that I wanted to add, which is to build on the mayor's remarks, is that we are a resource. And what so often happens, especially in a more localized disaster, is you're looking for food and shelter and all those things. And we know our local businesses. We have relationships with civic groups who want to help, and that might be an instance where we can also provide assistance, and we also understand the communities a little bit better. So again, to use us as a resource. Thank you.
Thank you. This is exactly the kind of conversation that we need to have around this. And I will do what we have to do in the Emergency Operation Center all the time. I'm going to improvise a little bit up here, which is to say, I think you're right. The District Disaster Office is wherever you are. Right, and we need to have the ability to have that be virtual. We need to have the ability to be in multiple different locations. And the one that maybe was proposed to you may not be the home base one that you want. I think one of the kind of inside baseball reasons the libraries work so well is you can stand those up without, the way they're designed from a security standpoint, you can have access to those very, very easily without staff having to be a kind of monkey in the middle on the access and the security. But your point is entirely valid and well taken, and in the end, you represent your district, and you need to be able to be comfortable with how you're being communicated with and where you are. So we're very open to revising the locations to make sure they work with you, and revising the locations again in real time based on the actual incident, and being more forward-leaning with you in terms of using you as a resource in any given incident. I think it's completely 100% valid. So we'll take that back as policy feedback. We will modify our approach accordingly and bring back another iteration to you based on that feedback with your permission. Other feedback on the District Disaster Office piece? Mr. Vice Mayor.
Well, this is actually pre-disaster in terms of communicating and getting the information out to our constituents before the disaster takes place. I think I had to be told about 20 times to prepare, a backpack full of, proper supplies before I actually did it. We have to constantly communicate with our community, and this is my opportunity to say my favorite Mike Tyson quote, that everybody has a plan until they get hit. We know that when the disaster happens, it's going to be panic and terror. But the more we communicate, the more we have outreach to the community, the more we touch them to get them to prepare for that disaster, I think it's going to be beneficial to any kind of disaster preparedness or disaster recovery.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, did you have something you want to add?
No.
Anything else on this concept before we move to the next piece? Thank you. Extremely useful discussion, great feedback. We will we'll iterate to improve. So we're going to keep rolling through, and this next part is going to be a lot of fun. So if we could flip to the next slide. So yeah, the map. Just hold it there for a second. So pick your favorite fault line. Right? San Andreas, Calaveras, Hayward. My particular favorite fault is the Silver Creek Fault. Not very active, but it runs right through downtown and through our airport. That's one that keeps me thinking about things. If you look at the major faults in our area, in Northern California, what you know about these faults is that they are a global system. We have the intersection of two tectonic plates which are moving in relative opposite directions of each other. And that movement creates pressure. The only way to relieve that pressure is for them to move physically. So it is not a question of if, it is simply a question of when, how big, and where. So if you look cumulatively at the most active fault lines, Hayward, Calaveras, and San Andreas, there is a 72% chance within the next 30 years that one or more of them will pop at a magnitude above 7, which is a major, major, major shaking. So if I told you I had a 72% chance of who was going to win the Super Bowl, that would be a pretty good bet that you might put some investment in. So we have a 72% chance within our generation of experiencing a major event within our context. So the interesting thing about 1 minute before an earthquake is it is exactly like any other minute. First thing that happens is the fault will rupture. It'll move dramatically in several directions. And first thing that we'll know is the P wave, the primary wave that comes through. It's actually a sound wave, just below our range of hearing. We won't actually hear it, but some of us will sense it a little bit more. It might move something light like that, but it'll be a sound wave that rolls through. Animals will hear it and react to it in a way that we won't. Depending on how close we are to the fault, 30, 45 seconds later, the S wave hits, S1, the first secondary wave. That's the shaking that starts, all right? So let's hit this. So in this case, we have a rupture along the Hayward Fault. It pops at about a 7.0 magnitude, and boom, already we've got the P wave, the S wave, the shaking is already starting. If we were in this room, you would duck, cover, and hold, making sure that your head was below as much of the equipment as you can get. This is a very safe building, but there's still going to be a lot of shaking, and things are going to go. That shaking is going to continue. The shaking is going to look like this room is moving 3 to 5 feet. If you were to run out rather than drop, cover, and hold, you might get thrown to the ground and break an ankle or break a leg or break an arm. The shaking is going to be that hard. Loose things will be falling off of buildings at that point. The shaking is still continuing. It will feel like a lot longer than this minute that it is. And it will be bigger than anything you've experienced and make the Loma Prieta quake seem relatively small. And at the same time, what is happening along the Hayward Fault in particular is we have a lot of infrastructure that is coming over the mountains. We have pipelines for water. We have electricity lines, major transmission lines. We have connectivity with the internet. We have all sorts of east-west connectivity, which has just ripped apart and been sheared. Much of that has been hardened since the Loma Prieta quake, but how it will respond to a 5-foot movement across 83 miles of the Hayward Fault, it's never been tested in the real world yet. So that's just happened. Likelihood is now there is something called an aftershock that may happen while the initial shock is going. Quakes are not individual events, they are multiple events. There can be dozens, hundreds, or thousands of aftershocks after a major event like this, spanning for days. Immediately, your telecommunications will be affected. This phone will probably not work. Hopefully this phone will. And the entire Bay Area will have felt the effects of this. In this map, you see the color coding shows the red is the most severe shaking, and then as it lightens out, less shaking. So in this particular scenario, it's concentrated around Oakland. San Jose is relatively less affected, but don't get happy about that yet. Areas of liquefaction, especially near rivers or areas that were rivers, liquefaction is what happens when the earth vibrates in a way that the ground becomes as if it were liquid. Foundations can slip and slide, and so homes in the areas are affected. So in that case, we've activated our Emergency Operations Center. It's essentially self and automatically activated. The shift comes in, and we have our operations going. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to begin to interview folks and ask them about what they're doing and what they're thinking about in an event like this. Now, if you've ever watched reality TV shows, one of my favorite things that happens in reality TV shows sometimes is they change the rules on the participants in the middle of the show. So everybody in here is expecting, we've got a good annotated agenda, we have prepared questions, and they're expecting me to ask them prepared questions. Well, I am, unbeknownst to all of them, shaking this up in 2 ways. One, I will be free to ask them any question, regardless of whether it's on the pre-written list or not, about their role. And two, I'm giving you the right to interrupt, because you'll be doing that. Real world. The only limit I'm going to put on you, because I can just this once, is that each council member gets one interrupt during the session. We'll then process it afterwards, but each of you gets to interrupt me at any point during the session and throw a question, idea, concern at me, which I may say, not right now, but then I may throw back to our EOC director and the team to think about. Okay, so neither of those things did they know was going to happen, including Ray, who is now looking at me as calmly as he can. So with that in mind, EOC Director, one more thing, just to give you a context of what you're looking at. This is a staffing model that is based originally on the Prussian general staff model, evolved in California by our firefighters and incident command system, and is now both the state and national model. You see in black, the management section. You see in blue, our planning section. You see in the orangish red, the largest and most complex section, the operations section. You see parts of the management section here in purple, and light blue are communications and liaison function. You'll be getting to know this one very well. Yellow, the logistics function. A new function that we've instituted, recovery section, light gray. Green, where the money is, finance. Part of the recovery section here. And then, again, as I mentioned, our department operations centers out beyond. This all makes sense to us. These colors are very meaningful. Mr. Wilcox, what's on your mind after this has happened?
Activation of the EOC. So we activate the EOC very differently. There's planned events, which we had already gone over. Those decisions are usually made between Kip and I in consultation with Ray. And then clearly telling our city manager what we're doing. In the event like this, there's a standard operating procedure we all follow. If there's an earthquake of 6.0 or higher, the blue shift, we have two shifts, a blue and a gold. The blue shift, after checking in with family and coworkers, is to report to the EOC within 2 hours. So after this event coming into the EOC, my primary worry is a fully staffed EOC to begin work.
Okay. And what are the basic objectives that you're looking for in a situation like this? What are you going to lay out as your top line priorities?
Sure. So, when we talk about the EOC, it's very important, and we sort of got into it a little bit with you all in the district office scenario. But the EOC it's a single point for managing the disaster. It's really an implementation tool to support the field in their role. Field commanders, field personnel in the field are going to be dealing with that specific incident. In a case like this, there's going to be thousands of incidents across the city. So gathering that information and having a big city kind of viewpoint is very critical in making executive decisions throughout the whole city. We're kind of in a scenario where we're the only ones that kind of get that whole big picture scenario. So in setting the objectives, Ray and Kip and I are pretty diligent. It's in our emergency operation plan that's been approved. Protection of life, protection of property, protection of the environment. Those are three basic objectives that we would surround any type of event. We have a lot of flexibility as the EOC director to prioritize those. In this case, I'm going to be prioritizing protecting life. Within that first operational period, we also have objectives that flow up into those other objectives. Within this scenario, our situational awareness and the damage assessment and the percentage of those in need of help is the most important to inform the field and the following shift that Kip would be taking over.
Right. Okay, I'm going to go to your EPIO, Emergency Public Information Officer perspective. Rosario, you've had been through us with at least all of these activations. You've built up and done a masterful job building up our multi-language capacity and making sure that we're able to more quickly engage across social media. As this is happening, what is your crisis communication plan tell you you're focusing on? What are you worrying about and thinking of as you're bringing your EPIO team together?
Well, the first measure that we'll be taking is to follow the EOC director's lead in any activation of the EOC. And so
Most likely in this scenario, we will already have activated the EPIO branch. I will have activated the entire EPIO team, which consists of different components, including an information analysis branch, a messaging branch, and a media branch. At a full-scale activation of the EPIO, we're anticipating participation from about 15 to 20 individual staff members. So I think what I'll be thinking about during this scenario.
Oh, we got our
is-
first interrupt.
I do have I was going to interrupt Lee. But.
Oh, sorry.
You can interrupt me.
I could sense that.
We can still interrupt Lee.
I
I'd be
sense
happy to do that.
So obviously the staffing of the EOC is super important, right? Without the staffing, nothing happens. And so what I'm curious about is, not all staff in the city live in San Jose.
Yep.
Some
I
live in
was
other
just going
places.
there.
How do you make certain that folks are available given some of the circumstances, live circumstances? How do you make sure you're properly staffed?
Great.
Good question.
Why don't we throw that one at
Yeah.
Lee?
Sure. So, really quickly, we have two shifts, a blue and a gold. There's also an alternate for every single one of those positions. Especially for section chiefs, folks within the operational division, they have a lot of conversations amongst each other. Where they live, oh, I'm going to be out of town this weekend. So even, I'm not on the blue shift, I'm on the gold shift. Kip and I talk a lot. Hey, Kip's going to go down to San Diego for the weekend, so I know I need to respond. One of the most important things that I'll be doing is coming into the EOC is within logistics and with the EOC, we'll have personnel there actively working to fill slots where people are unable to get in. So that's going to be a primary function within that first 12 hours to make sure we have a staffing model. But a lot goes on kind of in planning just amongst each other and through the Office of Emergency Management to ensure that we're covered, especially on long weekends, holidays.
Ray, you want to add to that?
The one thing I'd add is that not only do we pre-identify the staff, we've been training them, we also do a poll once a month, who's around, who's taking vacation, so we have a knowledge of where we could have a gap, and we try to fill that or understand it, particularly because we do have the holiday weekends, which the rhymes with mud occurred in 2017 over a holiday. So we also pay attention to that, so we're leaning ahead.
Yeah, and the somewhat less polished answer is you're going to have to see who's able to get there, who's able to show up, and then you have the what's our staffing level now? We have about how many people in the city?
7,600 bodies.
Yeah, so about 7,600 folks. Every single one of them is a disaster service worker. Mr.
Yeah, so I just want to emphasize this point because it's another lesson learned in terms of how we do this work, and it's certainly a big lesson we learned from 2017. So, when it comes to the operational departments, they're already every day in full operational mode. So with the conversation that we're having right now is how we make sure the EOC is managed. So we manage that very differently in terms of what was just described, all the way up through the manager's office. All of our time off is coordinated, so there is always complete coverage so that we can cover all the bases all the time, 24/7, every day of the week. So it's a really important question that you asked, and it has been a big part of our learning through this process.
All right, so we'll continue with EPIO.
Great.
That
You
was a great
actually
interrupt. Thank
had
you.
anticipated exactly where I was going. So in the first 2 hours, what I'll be focused on is where is my staff? Where are my members of my EPIO branch? And have they been impacted by the disaster? So if they are able to work virtually, that's what we do. We will set it up virtually. But everybody has already received clarity on their roles. They know what to do, and they know that we need to respond. What I will be thinking about is what do we know at this time? So do we have any information that's available as far as areas that are severely impacted? Have there been any impacts to drinking water or wastewater facilities? And is that what we need to be communicating to the public? Who's impacted, where those neighborhoods are, and also how members of the community can be prepared for any aftershocks or further impacts. The main audiences that I would be thinking about in these first few hours and moments is you all, the council, and what information we need to deploy to you, the media, the broader public and members of the community, and then also our partners, such as school districts, churches, and what information we would need to be able to deploy to them. I will also be thinking about technology barriers that we might be experiencing. So if phone lines are down or we're not, or cell towers are down and we're not able to deploy that technology, then we need to look at alternate methods to get information out to the public, deploying our LRAD technology, coordinating with public safety to get information out, via old school paper handouts, and get that information out that way, word of mouth or knock and talks. So we'll be looking at different alternate methods of communicating if we need to.
So the first person that the council members are likely to hear from, Lee, who do you think they'd be hearing from?
That would be myself or you.
Right, or probably Dave.
Yeah, or Dave.
Who's
And
the
then
second
it's
person they're going to hear from?
From Jennifer Shembri or Kim Wallish.
Okay, Jennifer, tell us a little bit about the liaison function and your experience with it and how you'd be thinking about it in something like this.
Sure. So the liaison function has a couple different roles. I would say the most important is making sure that we're maintaining contact with the city council. So the first point of contact with the city council, disseminating information on a regular basis. So for example, in the power safety shutoffs, we set up regular conference calls with the city council just to provide information, coordinated very closely with the EPIO unit so that if there was information that was being sent out, we made sure that the council received that. And to kind of take that responsibility from the EOC director once we get started in the Emergency Operations Center so that they can focus on their role as EOC director and we're the main point of contact. But not only with city council, we're also with other entities, so school districts, counties. We also lead special projects. So for example, in the power safety shutoffs, we organized the call center that was calling the medical baseline customers, things like that. So.
Thank you. All right, operations. Angel, you're the operations section coordinator for this. This operations is typically the largest group in a situation like this. What are the priorities that go through your head? What expertise are you pulling in and making sure is there on the operations section?
Yeah, I think at this point, it's all about field level emergency response, right? And this is kind of an all hands on deck type of situation. Some of the key branches within operations, you got mass care, you got law enforcement, you got transportation, fire and rescue, construction and engineering, damage inspection, environmental services. So you kind of just assume the worst and bring in all the right folks. Now those are all like titles and roles, but in addition to that, we're looking at who are the people in those roles that we need to, based on the incident at hand, that we need to pull in, right? So there's that vetting as well. And really, it's all about really defining what do we need to do now, right? Gaining a clear understanding of the incident, really kind of synthesizing the data that we have before us.
We got to interrupt.
All
right, Councilmember Camus. This is fun for me, at least.
Yeah, for you.
Notice I'm not wearing the black vest.
All right, well, since my district tends to be cut off, there's only really two roads in and out of my entire district. I know I'm going to be very concerned with having services such as police and fire and ambulance services in my district. How do I ensure that I get services, and no offense to downtown, but at least as responsive as downtown?
Yeah, let me take this. I'm going to throw this both at the fire and rescue branch and then at the law branch. And I'm going to frame it I'm going to take this, it's come in through the liaison, and it's come to us. Give us a sense of what, normal day-to-day operations you all run are very, very complicated, very, very well done. I think you've got 91,000 calls a year. You've gotten the 500,000 calls a year. So 99.9% of that stuff we ever worry about here. In the instance you've got a big event like this, how does your approach shift from the normal day-to-day service delivery to this, and how do you balance between those two? I'm going to go with fire, and then I'll go with law branch. Same question.
All right, thank you for the question. First, let me start with an overview of the fire department, of your fire department, because we cover the entire city with 5 battalions. We have 33 fire stations, 53 apparatus that include 32 engines, 9 ladder trucks, our urban search and rescue team, crash rigs, squads, and 5 battalion chiefs. We do this with 186 personnel every single day. So those people are ready to respond every single day. Now, to answer your question, we prepare for major emergencies like this. We have systems put in place that when we do have a major emergency, such as an earthquake, that we have a system where we go out and we start to look at critical infrastructure. We look at roadways, we look at access points, We look at the ability, how to get to those people who may be cut off by damaged overpasses or down bridges. And we do that in conjunction with the San Jose Police Department.
And just to put a visual on this, and you correct me if I've got this wrong, Chief, one of the things that's going to be interesting or difficult about the shift is a lot of what we're talking about is situational awareness and information, right? The job of the EOC director is to be the thinker, anticipating the needs of the field. To do that, you need to understand what the situation is. So, normal course of business, if I've got a broken leg and I'm lying on the edge of Santa Clara Street, I'm going to expect a fire truck to, a paramedic to come and help me. In this situation, that vehicle or that apparatus may drive right by me, seeing full well that I'm lying on the street with a broken leg, because they have got to understand the larger situation and whether there's a collapsed building with 400 people that are damaged in it. That's going to be one of the shifts that's going to be very difficult as you go from I'm responding to your 911 call to I'm looking at a system-wide look at what's going on. Is that a reasonable characterization?
Yeah, what we do is prioritize life, and we look at who are the most vulnerable. So we do have collapsed buildings with people trapped. We have buildings on fire. Those are the priorities for the fire department.
Yeah. Chief Tyndall, how's the police department thinking about this shift from day-to-day operations to kind of the and both of a large scenario and operations?
So as far as deployment, I mean, I'm going to talk in a little bit about our deployment model and how we would do that. On a regular day-to-day basis, as you know, we do not necessarily just respond from the PD to calls. There would automatically be officers pre-deployed out in your specific area that even if critical infrastructure or roads were taken down, they would already be out there. And we would work hand in hand with fire in putting together a unified command where we dispatch based on priority calls that are either coming in through the 911 system or that we're getting information from other sources as to what the issue is, prioritize and respond accordingly. So the staff would already be out there. It'd be a matter of whether or not we deploy more staff to a specific scenario based on what that scenario is. And then if there was infrastructure issues, we would work out how essentially ingress, egress, whether it's by road or by alternate means to get out there and handle stuff.
Now, since I've got both of you on the spot, I'm going to kind of go down back to the next level here. And I want to understand, we've got fire and law here in the EOC. We also have fire in the field as an incident commander, and we have police as an incident commander. I want to give Deputy Chief Van Elgort a chance to talk about what is your role as in the field role in this case. You've played on both sides of this. What is the field perspective, and how is that different from the EOC, and what do you need from the EOC on the field side? Then I'll ask the same question of law.
So to clarify, we have pre-existing incident command setup where we would activate our Department Operations Center, our DOC, and we have it already pre-assigned who is the lead for that. That's the duty chief. And then we would establish an area command. Some large incident like that affects most of our city, we would have our battalion chiefs establish area command. And as the chief referenced, we're going to do a review of our own operational readiness. Are our stations functional and safe? Is our communication system working? And then we would do a critical infrastructure review. And what we're doing is we're looking at hazards, risks, and mitigation options as we go. And we have to think the greater good. And as Kip referred to, we're going to need to make some risk analysis and successful choices there. And that information flows from the area commanders to the DOC, where that information would then come to the operations. And really, in a sense, what we are as a customer, right? We're going to be asking for assistance to help us manage those area command needs. And that information would flow from the EOC to the DOC. And then if information comes in remotely, then it would flow back down the other way. But again, we have a structure in place. As he mentioned, ICS, Incident Command, started in the fire service. So we're well versed in how to operate within an EOC setting.
Lieutenant, from the law perspective, police perspective, you've got this incident as the incident commander. What are you thinking about, and what are you needing from the EOC?
Yeah, very similar to, I don't know if is that working? Sorry about that. Very similar to fire. We'll be looking at needs in the field and what we have as more of a localized type scenario, and where do we have issues where we need law enforcement to work with fire and set up. So we're looking at mobile commands in the field and how we're going to deploy The chief would be looking at more of a global type picture from the city and flying at a little bit higher elevation than I would be in the field. And we'd be doing assessments throughout the city and looking where we need to deploy to specific incidents. So we'd be working hand in hand with fire, as he mentioned, a unified command with fire, and we'd be looking at the prioritization.
We've got to interrupt. Excellent. Councilmember Foley.
Just as PD's responding, because this relates to gridlock. If we know anything from Loma Prieta disaster, everyone gets in their cars and heads home. They head to their schools, they want to pick up their children, they head to home because that's their base. And when that gridlock occurs, it's difficult for police and fire to get around to handle any emergency services. So can you, I'm not even sure how to phrase this question, but how do you handle the gridlock that will occur immediately as soon as everybody hits the road trying to get home?
So I'll actually talk about, and Fire's done a masterful job of this in the mapping systems that they have with alternate routes. And I would say they probably do it. We certainly respond to incidents, but because of their knowledge of specific location, have mapped out alternate routes. So there's several different things we can do. Obviously, we've licensed sirens for a reason, so people will know where we're coming and hopefully get out of the way. There's different ways of doing it. If we have to go in alternate directions on roadways, we would certainly do that. We can do things like counterflow, where we actually control the movement of traffic, potentially work with DOT on lighting systems. So there's a multitude of different ways, really depending on the incident itself, how far we're expanding, contracting, so that we can get clear avenues to get to where we need to go.
That's got a good transportation piece. I'm going to let John Ristow, who would be leading the transportation branch, add in his perspective on this, maybe based on some of the experiences you had in the power safety shutoff.
Yeah, thanks, Kip. John Ristow, Director of Transportation. So when something like this at this magnitude might happen, it's very likely that that normal commute home may not be available for people. There could be bridges out, roadways not functioning, debris in the way, signals not working. So our first steps is actually to assess what the situation is, to see what's out there working. People are immediately going to be out on the streets, but we got to figure out what is each open or even accessible or safe. And we do that with Public Works, with Fire and PD. So those kind of things happen first, and then we communicate that up to EOC back to our security people, PD and Fire, in terms of where those routes are that are going to be safe, number one. And then we start working with PD. Do we need to shut down the roads? How are we going to do that? Just to reemphasize what Dave was saying, we actually have people in the field all the time doing normal routine duties of transportation system. But an event like this happens, then we redeploy, bring more people in, and then start to react to that situation. Police will tell us where we need to be putting barriers or where we're going to be doing different traffic and signal timing, how we're going to be dealing with that. So we haven't had this yet, but that's the plan, and the idea is how we would respond to some of those things.
Great, thank you for the interrupt. I'm going to swing over to a section that everybody who actually works in the EOC has a great fondness for, which is logistics. I'm going to give you two different levels of question on this, and it may seem a little silly, but this stuff really matters. One is you've got all this coming at you, you've got requests and needs from the field level. How are you thinking about that? And then the most important thing that we sometimes look forward to logistics would be,
what food are you ordering for the next shift? And how much coffee?
And there's some laughter on that, but I want to touch on that in a moment. So Walter, your answer to those two important questions.
Thank you, Kip. The priorities of the logistics section are really twofold. We want to ensure that all of the cities, the municipal critical facilities are operational and functional. Without that in place, the city response teams are not able to do their jobs effectively. So our job is to look at, for example, if a critical situation like a major earthquake, looking at our critical facilities and ensuring that they are safe. So if there are immediate repairs, dangerous situations, we are safing off those areas at first. If the utilities, the primary utilities are out, we are bringing in and establishing those backup systems and ensuring that they work. So we have constant power for those building systems. That is first and foremost to ensure that the city operations can continue, especially in these times of need. The second equally parallel priority is to get the resources available to all response teams, whether that's inside the EOC or on the field. Our job is really to provide those support services. That includes providing equipment, facilities, supplies, resources, labor, and still be in constant coordination with those critical facilities to ensure that they are consistently running. We do so with a combination of in-house resources, our in-house labor, in-house equipment, in-house vehicles. If needed, we will go contractually, rental services for some equipment, and then we'll also look at our suppliers, the equipment and the resources that we need. We definitely deploy and get those resources. As Lee mentioned, there's a critical function to ensure that the EOC staff is also properly maintained as well. That includes food, water, resources, anything that the internal staff needs to deploy out and get those instructions out to the field teams. That is also a very critical function, especially for staffed up for multiple days in a row. It takes its toll, and to ensure that the health of the EOC employees, that's one of our critical priorities as well.
Yeah. So we'll be running. What are our shift schedule going to look like in something like this, Lee?
Yeah, so the first shift would, if this were to happen sometime in the afternoon, let's say, what time did this happen? Well, let's assume
whenever
that
you want it to be.
Let's assume it happened at 5 o'clock during commute. That first shift would immediately start, and normally shifts are 12 hours. What Kip and I have tried to do is do a 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. It's a little bit better, especially for those folks working the night shift, kind of to adjust to that. So this first shift would be a 14-hour shift.
Yeah. Yeah, you pull it in. And talk a little bit about what those transitions are around the shift, like what you and I would be doing, and then everybody else with their counterparts might be doing.
Sure. So, we say a 12-hour shift. In reality, it's a little over 13 because, for us in this first shift, all of us would be staying past 7 o'clock, doing a transition, doing a debrief, doing a stand-up with both shifts in the EOC to ensure that transition happens properly. Same as coming in. You need to come in. We would be coming in well before 7 p.m. to see what that's like. We have implemented some things, which we'll get to later, to help with that transition and help with communications, but you are looking at somewhere around 13 or a little bit more. But that continuity, which is why we have the planning process as well, is really important to continue through the shifts.
And then for some of us in the management section in particular, off shift is the time that we can get out in the field, walk around, talk to people, see things, and make sure that we have an understanding outside of the windowless room that is the EOC, what's going on. So you're doing that in between the shifts, sleeping, eating, and getting right back to that shift. So let's go on. We've got our finance, the appropriately green finance vest. Luz is new to our organization, but this is a good example of what happens in an emergency. So welcome to the city, and we've activated you on right here in month 1. What are you thinking about as you step into this, and what are the issues that, from a finance perspective, you're going to need to be dealing with in a role like this?
So, this is on? Yeah. So Kip very carefully avoided my last name. Thank you, Kip. My last name is Kofresi Howe. So it's Luz Kofresi Howe, and I am new to the organization. I joined in December 2019. And as the Finance Administration Section Coordinator, what we're responsible for is assuring that the appropriate finances and administrative processes are in place so that we can continue to function and support the disaster, the immediate disaster, and as well as the recovery. So our responsibilities, my initial responsibility would be to report to the EOC director exactly on the current cash position of the city, how we are doing as far as what is liquid and what we can have available to use. And then also, we would use that as a baseline to monitor the burn rate of our expenditures during this time. We would also be notifying the EOC director on where the location and how much spending capacity people have, particularly.
We've got an interrupt.
Of course.
Okay, Councilmember Perales.
Thank you. Apologies. My thinking here is, and this may happen in the same context where we have an interjection now of mutual aid.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody coming from the outside, it took them a little bit, we're sort of already gotten the wheels rolling. How do we manage that aspect? Who is in charge of that? We have support, and I think before that would be who's reaching out,
yeah,
right, for asking for help? Because I know what we have in the room is everybody here, right, all the locals, so sort of, hey, we're trying to take care of our own house. But the reality is that we're going to have, I think, outside, right, agencies and support that are going to want to come in, and we're going to want to be ready to ask them for help, as we have been asked, and we've, certainly lent our support. How are we going to manage that now as it, to ask for it and as it comes in?
Excellent, and there are lots of different types of mutual aid, just to make it more complicated. I'm going to start with Ray, our planning sections coordinator on this one, because that's where we're going to try to have a coherent approach to these different types of asks that we're getting and dealing with, frankly, at several different levels at once. Ray?
So the mutual aid program is pretty complex, but it's also driven and been well-oiled for many years. Law and fire have their own capability of requesting mutual aid up through their channels, right through the county and onwards up. The same with emergency management. There's an EMA, Emergency Management Mutual Aid Program, where we can request other resources and services. For example, I went to Santa Rosa to assist them after the fire through this EMA process and requesting. So the request would go from our understanding of what the event is, knowing what resources we have or what we don't have, identifying what we can request of mutual aid, which could be people, equipment, other resources, and we send that request then to Santa Clara County operational area. They look then within the operational area, which is the boundary of the county, and then they push it up to the region of the state to request. So there's a process that's used, documentation that's required in order to get the reimbursement later from the event.
And there's an additional aspect I'd like to add on to this. Is in the earlier discussion, we talked about sort of what I think of as stance on activation and notification, right? Are you forward-leaning, or are you backward-leaning? Because you're going to make a mistake. You're not going to get it perfect every time. So which direction do you want to make the mistake? Do you want to make the mistake on activating more than is necessary or less than is necessary? And so we've made the determination, and the direction from the city manager is, if you're going to make a mistake, lean forward. And so I think part of what we've been talking about with mutual aid is which way do we want to make that mistake? City manager.
Yeah, so I think just emphasizing this point, because Ray went through it a little quickly there. So we are coordinating through the county for these requests. And that at times can be really difficult. And we've already talked about, our reliance on other agencies. We want to have the internal capacity to do all these things, because at times relying on other agencies has not been to our benefit. But in this case, we have to exercise a great deal of discipline doing that. If we're all out there engaging on different pathways, it is complete chaos in an environment that's already chaos. So I will tell you, when we're making these requests through that process, it can be tense, it can be challenging. The relationship that we have with the county is very positive, but as you can imagine, during these types of scenarios, we're looking to make sure that we're getting what we need and when we need it, and we're putting a tremendous amount of pressure on the county to be able to make sure they're advocating and responding to our needs.
Right, and I think one of the lessons learned, if you think about it, once something like this happens, at least our expectation is that's our job for the next 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, and continuous activation for many weeks at a time. One of the observations of the folks in the fire is that they kind of, at one point, we had a group ready to go, and they said, oh no, we think we're okay, we got it. But in our internal discussions is we're going to need to be able to swap people out of this. We're going to need to keep them rested. So we're going to begin that advocacy early, thinking about the long haul of the process and not just trying to be the heroes. We'll stay in it and stay active as long as we need to, but we're also going to have to break out, both on fire, police, and in the EOC, if we're going to sustain that level of effort over potentially multiple months. Good interrupt. All right, so where were we? We're in finance. I'm going to shift us over. One more thing to say in finance?
I actually do need to say one more thing, because Ray actually brought it up, and he used the word reimbursement, and what we don't want to, which is very important, and an important role for the Finance and Administration Group, is to ensure that people are using the appropriate accounting codes, know how to track their time, know how to track every equipment and procurement. I'm going to point you to, this is the guide for FEMA reimbursement, and this has multiple references to it. So FEMA is particularly Byzantine in its nature, and sometimes arcane. But in order for us to have the opportunity to reimburse to the full extent that we can, and in some cases we can get up to 90% with FEMA, is we have to follow their procurement rules. And that unit reports out of Walter's group, the logistics group. But we want to be sure that the city is not completely impacted after this disaster.
Yes, and FEMA can claw back money that they've already given you as much as 5 to 7 years later if you
Yes, they
haven't
can.
followed their procedures to the precise T. So you could have hundreds of millions of dollars that you've actually spent, thought you got a reimbursement for, and pulled back if we are not straight up and down with the woman in the green vest here. Okay, we have a new section that is not necessarily replicated elsewhere. It's the recovery section, and I'd love to have Jim and Jackie talk a little bit about sort of why this section exists and what you'd be beginning to worry and think about in a situation like this.
Sure, so I'll get it started. So the job of the recovery section really is to help coordinate the support for recovery for individuals, businesses, and the city government. And so the first thing that we'll be doing when we get in is working with the different branches to assess, what is the scale of the recovery needs. So that's going to be infrastructure, that's going to be people that are displaced, it's going to be damage to businesses. One of the first things that we start to work on is the initial damage estimate. That'll be very critical going forward to kind of set the stage for all the reimbursement and cost accounting for FEMA. Recovery, I think one reason why we will be standing up recovery in the EOC is to make sure we're engaged in that process early. So if we can do all that coordination early at the beginning, it sets us up better over the longer run, over even the 5 to 7 years, to make sure that we're in a good position just to protect the city to get as much reimbursement as we can. So we're there in the beginning, squunched in between finance and logistics, which is where we want to be in the EOC. We're up in everybody's business to the extent that we can to figure out sort of what's going on, working with planning, mass care, and the housing branch. We'll also be figuring out what should the organization of the recovery section really be. Physically, there's not really a lot of space in the EOC because there's, especially for a major activation like an earthquake, everybody else will be activated too. Similarly, the best work that we do and was demonstrated in the flood is our peers that are going to be hopefully maybe still at City Hall or some city facility where we can help coordinate some of that work. So it'll be figuring out what is that initial needs assessment and figuring out how we can organize ourselves to best respond over the coming days.
Thank you. Jackie?
So because we can anticipate it in something like this, the damage to our housing stock would be extensive. The housing department would be coordinating with PRNS and the Red Cross because it's most likely in this scenario we're going to need longer term shelter, and the Red Cross has very limited time in terms of which they're able to operate and manage the shelter. So we would be immediately planning for what that transition would look like, who would be able to operate it, would it need to be city run or be able to be managed by a nonprofit. We would also begin to be working with PBCE to understand the exact nature of the damage assessments as they begin to understand the impact to the housing stock. One of the things we know from doing our work on the post-housing plan is that something in this case, it's most likely we're going to need to have identified a large site, which could be outside of our borders, of where we could stand up some temporary housing for people. And so we would immediately want to access that because this could be a regional disaster, and whoever gets there first is going to be the one who's able to access whatever land we've identified. So we want to be nimble and quick in securing those resources so that we can begin to plan for that longer period. So we're going to be working with finance to understand the resources that we are able to access. And then we'd also need to work with local agencies because the housing department will be coordinating with Cadre and other nonprofits so they can help us with the immediate and long-term recovery efforts. We know there are human components, obviously, to this, and we need to be thinking about how people actually recover. I'm going to be asking Ray to contact the county for mental health and social services support because we know our residents are going to need that as we begin to plan for the longer term. So part of the thing that we're doing now as part of our recovery work is trying to create contracts that we can have in place so that we can immediately activate and connect with the nonprofits that can help us to do this work.
And just to put a bit of, maybe a bit of an academic gloss on top of that, part of what we realized both through experience and through the research is what you all know through experience in your own research, which is disasters disproportionately affect low-income people, disproportionately affect community of colors, disproportionately affect renters, disproportionately affect people who do not have documentation and citizenship. In fact, there's some interesting studies that certain types of homeowners actually come out better over the long haul through a series of disasters because of the way FEMA is structured, because they're able to build back on their house larger after the event and gain wealth, whereas renters go in the exact opposite direction. So the normal course of business would be to focus kind of entirely on the response and worry about the recovery a little bit later. We wanted to do those in parallel so that we are doing the response in a way that anticipates the needs of the recovery. And you have a separate section on a slightly different time scale that's getting ahead of the game while we're doing the immediate sheltering needs. We're also thinking about the longer term housing needs, et cetera. Did you have?
I was debating whether to use my whammy now or something.
Yeah, it's kind of,
Just jump in.
that's why I gave you only one.
Yeah. So, you know, an earthquake this magnitude, I assume some cell towers are going to go down. I know we have at least one transmission line that runs along those east hills that I would imagine might also go down, which means if there are cell towers operating, they have, what, 4 to 6 hours of backup generation to be able to continue to...
It depends on whether they're macro or the small cells. The
Yeah.
macros can have backup generation for 12 to 24 hours.
12 to 24, okay. So either for the first responders or perhaps even for recovery, at some point, these may not be useful anymore. How is it we're all communicating if cell phones are out throughout a large part of the city?
Yeah. Let's do two things. Let's talk about the redundant communication system, and then I want to actually take a hit on the cell phone approach. Who's the best person to talk about the comms? Who do you want to talk about that, Lee?
Well, in our operations and in our plans, there's more than one level of communication capability that we have. We do have the interoperable radio system that is pretty robust in the programs that they've been building out. So we do anticipate that the radio-to-radio communications will work.
Can
We
I
also-
stop you there for a moment, Ray? Just to
Yeah.
understand, I understand that would mean police and fire would have those, right?
Correct.
What about all of our other teams at the EOC? Does everyone have access to
The
one of
EOC would have full access to that.
The EOC,
Okay.
and we are working on looking at how we can add that communication to at least our department operations centers as well.
Good.
So we can have that linkage.
Great.
We also have amateur radio. It's one of the best radio communication systems ever built. And we have worked with the amateur radio system folks to help develop what we're calling wireless electronic network. So we can deploy those to shelters, to other places, which will allow us to gain internet and other communication capabilities. We have, in the EOC, we have 21 different types of communications that we can activate.
From law or fire, anything you want to add on the communications and interoperability work that we've done?
Yeah, so there's various different levels that we can work with depending on the magnitude. You know, when we start at the top portion of it, at least from law enforcement and fire, if it's 1 or 2 towers that go down, the system actually automatically links to other towers. So we may see channels blend, police channels blend with each other, so it's a simulcast system. As you start knocking towers out, then we start moving to a more fundamental system, like our legacy system, where there is in fact a antenna on top of the police building, where that can be used to push out information out in the field. We also have something else called, we call a dispatcher in a box, which is actually dispatch centers that we can stand up at the 5 battalion stations that are out there, so that we can essentially communicate on a more localized basis. And then another one that we could end up using is the putting some of our command vans that have repeater boxes inside them that can also be used as a localized system. So many, many different levels depending on the damage and expandability of what's going on.
Anything critical to add on that, Chief?
Yeah, he covered most of everything. The only thing I'll add is that all of our battalion chiefs and some of our overhead staff also have satellite phones.
Yep.
So in an event of
As do we.
those things go down, we'll utilize satellite phones to communicate.
Yeah, and then the additional layer that we built in over the last several activations is we now have a section that's dealing with telecommunications and a section that can deal with electricity. So people like Lori from our energy shop, people like Jay from our small cells team. With FirstNet, which we've invested in, has a special band 14, they have dedicated to us in an event like this, they will roll cows and colts, cellular on wheels, cellular on light truck. They will fly those in if needed, emergency land those, and deploy additional cellular capability, specifically for our first and extended responders who are on the band 14, which will be a dedicated communication network, which will allow us not only voice communication, but data communication in real time and high bandwidth. And so they have redundancy built into the existing towers that are more hardened than a normal cell tower, and they have committed to us a rapid deployment of additional capacity, regardless of the nature of the incident in the case like this.
Thanks.
So that was a good whammy. Good use of your whammy. Okay, let's keep going. And we talked on the idea of inspection, and so I want to get two perspectives on inspection. One from inside the EOC, and then one from the actual field and DOC where you'll be doing the inspections. You've had a lot of experience with this in a lot of different contexts, including the effort we did around the flood. What will you be thinking about and worrying about, Chu, from an inspection standpoint in an event like this?
Obviously, the first priority in our mind under this situation is really how quickly and how accurately we move all the damage data from the field to the DOC to the EOC. Then how fast we can redistribute the information out throughout the city, throughout the policymakers, throughout the GIS system. The inspection throughout the last year or so we're working on is really trying to clarify two things. There is a damage assessment and there is a safety assessment. So how we deploy the right resources go to damage assessment or the safety assessment. We rely heavily on our friends on the fire and the police give us overall the damage assessment. After we get the damage assessment in, that including the public works, the sewer treatment plant or the water treatment plant or the roadway, all the conditions coming in, how we deploy our resource going out, and when we send our resource going out to do the safety assessment, actually as safely as possible for our own resource. In this kind of major event, what if the aftershocks happen? Do we really want to send the inspector again into the building to do that safety assessment? That's a lot of program we're trying to sort it out at this time. Thank you.
Yeah, and so let's go to Bill, who'd be the next level on the ground. Bill Main, one of our lead inspectors who did a yeoman's job leading our effort on rapid inspection last time around. You'd have an even bigger challenge in front of you this time. How would you be thinking about that and approaching that?
Well, first thing we're going to do is we need to find out the size of the event and the affected areas, and we can start to formulate the size of the teams that we're going to need and how many people I'm going to need on my team to be able to start doing the assessment. So that's going to be the first thing. Once we evaluate that, we have 5 command centers throughout the city that are stationed at 5 of our fire stations. If their event is in that area, we'll deploy to those certain areas. The one where we had with the flood downtown wasn't located by any of those fire districts, so we used a central mobile dispatch, which is going to be a fire command center. And fire allowed us to spend time inside their trailer, and that's where we kind of went back and forth and we made that. All right. My job is to evaluate all of the buildings and placard red, green, or yellow, depending on what the structure looks like. And that's really the job of the inspection team.
And I recall last time we used a tool from CAL FIRE that allowed all of us to see that information essentially at the same time in real time. Is that similar tool set that you'll be using this time around, or has that evolved or changed?
Yeah, they're in the middle of designing that now, and we've asked for that, the collector app, so we can see it at real time. During the last event, we were doing it back and forth through email off of an Excel spreadsheet. As I got the information, I was updating Chu in the EOC so he can update everybody as far as where we were at. But I was also getting the information from Chu regarding what critical infrastructures needed to be inspected. Maybe we wanted to open up a gym as a shelter. So I needed to make sure that I sent a team out immediately to evaluate that shelter to make sure before the press sent everybody to that gym that it was safe. It had all of the accessible features for everybody.
that had any needs throughout the city, that it was ready for them.
So there's an awful lot of back and forth, and the closer to real time that is, the better your team can do in the field.
Absolutely.
So let me jump over on this to Matt Lesh. Matt, you spent much of the last decade, if not more, building our capacities in center of excellence around geographic and geospatial information, including things like our master addressing database, and that has borne fruit in some of the comments that were made around our ability to look at things spatially. How are you thinking about geographic information in an event like this and supporting the other players on this team?
So with this event being massive, the impacts we're going to be looking at is, first of all, what communication, what technology is going to be able to be in play. You know, it'd be great if we could have the collector apps that we're building to be able to be deployed. But if they can't communicate in because the systems are completely down, we have other redundancies. We have the ability for paper maps, all the way down to paper maps, all the way out down to the field. But we're really hoping that these digital tools, because that allows for rapid deployment of information. One, we look to what do the users need, how do they need to know it? So how do we need to visualize the volume of information that's coming in? Because that's what the EOC director is looking for, is the volume of information, how do I visualize it both in space and time, and then relative as it's growing or ebbing? How do we take all of that information from the first responders to the field workers to the inspectors? How do we aggregate that information and populate it in a visual way so that they can make decisions?
So I just wanted to jump in because one of the work that the EOC has been doing is trying to identify those housing sites where we know vulnerable people live in, so that we could deploy, because as we've said, that vulnerable people, low-income people are going to be greatly impacted and would have less resources in order to respond.
So speaking of that, I want to touch on the mass care and shelter function, which is part of the operations team, and in our organization, mainly staffed by Parks and Rec. I want to go, again, to two different perspectives, the EOC perspective and then the Department Operations Center perspective with Neil and Jeremy, respectfully. So Neil, you've done this in the real many, many times now. What are you thinking about mass care and shelter in an incident like this?
You know, I think for us, we're going to be looking at the immediate response to this. Based on best practices, we look to about 10% of the affected population is what we're going to estimate that's going to need immediate shelter. So one of our differences between mass care initially and then what Jackie's team will do in recovery is focus on the immediate work. What we heard through the EOC is a repeated conversation that I'm really excited because we're all on the same page about this, which is about assessing, getting the information, and making a decision. So one of the first things that we do in mass care and working with the ops section is to understand what is the situation in the community. We're going to be looking for where we're going to be able to set up mass shelter based on information that is provided to us. Are there streets safe? Can we even get out to these spaces? And eventually, from Public Works, are even these buildings available and safe for us to get into? We have agreements already set up with the Red Cross and having identified shelters in multiple buildings across the city and the county that we are aware of. We're already working through the Office of Emergency Management on MOUs with most of our school districts.
Oh, we got to interrupt. Okay, perfect.
Gymnasiums.
Councilmember Carrasco.
Thank you.
The whammy.
My whammy. We only get one, right? So
Right.
I'm going to make it count. So between what Jackie, Neil, and Kip mentioned, of course, I have a huge concern because I represent District 5, and we know that vulnerable communities are throughout the entire city. I get that. But based on just your comments, low income, people of color, you know, and when you say 10% of the population, well, that's about 100,000 folks in the city of San Jose. I have a highly impacted district, as all of you well know. People are living in garages, they're living in people's living rooms, and they're doubling up in bedrooms. Entire family is in one bedroom. And so we know that we can have up to 15 people in one house. You know, that's one of the better case scenarios, actually. So my concern is that 10%, I'm going to have probably over 50% of that 10% in my district, only because of the current situation. So my question to you is, as you're looking around for shelter space and, or land to set things up. You know, I'd love to be able to have it close to where people are suddenly, you know, without communication, but I'm trying to think of just in District 5 in the vicinity, and I'm having a hard time thinking of where you're gonna set up shop, especially given that if it's this magnitude, the buildings in the hills, and in District 5, a lot of District 7, what borders District 8, and even what borders District 4, are very old buildings that have not been kept up.
Oh, right. You did not waste your whammy. All right. Neil and then Jeremy, we'll let you take a
Yeah,
shot at
I
that.
mean, that's definitely, I mean, one of the things that weighs heavily on this entire, you know, EOC team, especially in terms of the massive work that we'd be doing on this. So we look at kind of multiple scenarios, you know, especially with the earthquake and the large scale like this. What could we set up, you know, that will be outdoors? So that we look at large spaces, erecting, you know, tents and putting out the beds and all the supplies there. What we have seen in earthquakes around the nation, you know, people have a fear staying inside buildings as well. Once it's happened, if we had multiple earthquakes and it's large. So one of the things that we are going to look at kind of is the human impact of what would be feeling safe for those individuals. Because one of our jobs is to get people back into a normalized situation as best as possible. So we're going to be looking at everything from, you know, gymnasiums. We'll be looking at the large buildings like the convention center, you know, SAP Arena, outdoor spaces as well. And one of our challenges too is to manage between large mass shelter and safety issues with multiple people and to the smaller extent of, you know, buildings that can hold, you know, 100, 200 people. So there's going to be a lot of elements that we're going to have to put together around this. And part of our effort is going to be pulling information from our DOC and our field staff and from the community to know where it's going to be impacted. And our goal is to provide sheltering in the closest vicinity to the most impacted people. The challenge we're going to have, I think, as people mentioned, is that the streets are going to be impacted, right? We're not going to be, it's going to be very hard for us to expect people to travel miles to get to a centralized shelter. We're going to look for localized spaces for them.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that and use my whammy. Is that what we're calling it now?
Yeah, okay, double whammy. Okay.
It's a double whammy. So I actually wanted to emphasize that point because in District 7, we don't have a lot of community centers or open space. And it's a very high renter population, and District 7 and District 5 and parts of District 3 are amongst the most overcrowded housing census tracts in the city. And so, you know, it's a very dense population, and people are not going to be able to shelter in place. They don't have a front yard or a backyard to put up a tent, and there aren't a lot of large public buildings to use. And in fact, during the flood, we ended up using some churches kind of far away where Team Rubicon could come in and stay. But even the churches, just because of the configuration, it's tough. And so one of the things I'm going to ask you to do is to really go in and look at the census information to come up with realistic numbers in different parts of the city on how we're going to house people, because we just don't, I'm going to be real upfront, we don't have a lot of outdoor space in this kind of scenario where it's a mega disaster. And I mean, there are places in Evergreen, but Evergreen's going to be very isolated in the big one. And so those are some things that need to be figured out. And I'm not saying that you need to have the perfect answer now, but we need to go in granular and look at some of those neighborhoods. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that literally is a double whammy of both the most dense areas with vulnerability and the least ability to stand up the sheltering capacity there because of the nature of the lack of the sorts of larger buildings or open space that we might need. Jeremy, you've had to do this again in the real many times now. What would you add on to the dialogue and the perspective from a department operations center where you're actually interacting with the field and managing and leading this?
Thank you, Kip. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, all great points. I think our primary function is that we're really the boots on the ground with the DOC for mass care, PRNS, supporting the mass care directions, supporting shelters and evacuations. Our primary in looking at this is to work with our partners in Public Works, PBC, DOT, to establish where we can safely put people, where we can support them, and as Neil has already brought up, utilizing existing buildings, but also looking creatively at open spaces and other partners to create that, and as quickly as possible, get people into a new normalized, safe position after following these incidents.
Yeah, and if I could jump in on this one from my personal perspective, you know, we look around at who are the partner agencies, who are the groups who have these kind of capabilities, right? And in my experience, one of the organizations that actually has the most capability around rapid deployment of safe temporary housing is the military. And so part of what we would be looking for in mutual aid is to say, look, you have generic, whether it's the National Guard or whether it's a regular Army or whether it's the Marines, you have the capability of setting up strong back tents with proper systems for hygiene, with all of that stuff you need like that. You have that material and supplies pre-positioned. We don't want to militarize the response. We want to make sure that our civilians stay in control, but the type of mutual aid that we might be asking for is for that capability to be deployed rapidly in service of our community and not expect people to all self-serve and figure it out. And that's part of the assessment that we would make in coordination with Public Works is, are we able to serve it, or do we need to go higher? And at that point, we would not hesitate to lay out what we need and advocate very strongly for that kind of capability. But I think it's a very good challenge you've put to us to look at the details on the demographics and to think specifically about how we will serve the neighborhoods that are likely to be most impacted on this. I'm cognizant of time. I'm going to give us 6 more minutes with this, and I'm going to give Mr. Wilcox an accelerated module 3 to be crisp and on point with. The piece that I want to hit before we walk away from the EOC is folks who are doing a lot, not only on a daily basis, but a heck of a lot during the disaster, which is both Public Works / DOT, and I'd like to get a sense. I'm actually going to reverse the order, start in the field, and then work back up to the EOC on this question. So Patty and Rick, you've had deep experience in many different instances in this. You've been developing both you and your own team's capability. In a piece like this from the Department Operations Center, what's going on? What are you thinking about? What are you prioritizing? And what are you needing from the Emergency Operations Center?
So with the Public Works Department Operations Center, we provide a lot of functions in an earthquake situation. So the first thing probably we would be doing, aside from activating and getting folks in, is that I'm going to need intelligence to identify where I need to send people out to. And one of the things that we're going to be wanting to do is do a safety assessments and damage assessments of city facilities. We will be prioritizing facilities based on the criticality of need. And so we'll need to be coordinating with the Mass Care DOC, and we'll be communicating up through our EOC to understand what those facilities are. So they could be potential shelter sites. They could be the EOC itself, to make sure people can enter the EOC building, and the other city facilities where the Department Operations Centers and Police and Fire are based out of. They could be our airport, our regional wastewater facility, critical pump stations, and we'll be working with our partner departments who operate those facilities, because they're going to have the best understanding of what's working and what's not. And then that's for safety assessments and also for damage assessments. And we'll be also supporting debris management to help remove debris from any debris that might have fallen. And we'll probably be working with DOT as the lead department on that, but we'll be clearing public right away first, and I'm probably lead into Rick.
So, thanks, Patty. As Patty alluded to, DOT and DPW work very closely in scenarios like this. So from a DOT perspective, we're really looking at the public right-of-way, roads, bridges, sewer lines, stuff like that. And so, you know, our priorities will be damage assessment, safety assessment of those infrastructure, and also debris management in the public right-of-way. And now, you know, on top of that, taking a more prominent role for debris management in the EOC. So we'll be taking that role on in the future. And really kind of what we're doing as the situation unfolds is we have kind of a standard deployment of our resources based on kind of the regions of the city. We would immediately need to start gathering intelligence and kind of shifting the needs based on the situation. I think many of the field departments go through that process as well. And so beyond that, our priorities are safety of the public, reporting to the EOC, what we're seeing, getting intelligence up and getting intelligence back, kind of prioritization from the EOC, and just making sure everyone is updated.
You both alluded to something that I want to illustrate that I think is very important about the incident command structure. Is there's a kind of a sometimes people feel that the command and control structure means that everything comes up, and that Lee has some sort of checkbox on everything, yes or no, and then it goes back down, 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 goes back down. If it does, it's not working. The fundamental principle of the incident command system is that you push authority, responsibility, and autonomy down to the lowest possible level because, frankly, the people in the front lines and in the field know the work the best, know the situation the best, and in our instance are highly trained to do that work. So just like the folks here are not going to be interfering and making decisions on how to deploy the resources to the incident commanders and the DOCs are going to be providing autonomy to the field as they move. So I wanted to, you had spoke about cross-coordination between DOCs. You're not coming up and asking for approval and coming back down. You're doing the coordination that you need to. When you see patterns that you think we should know, you're letting us know. And when you need resources that are beyond us, you're letting us know. But you're not depending on us to tell you what to do at all. And I like the way you talked about that. So coming back to the EOC, Matt, Public Works Director in your day job, Public Works branch leader in your EOC role, what are you thinking about in this?
Sure. The first thing that is most important to me is just making sure that everybody's in the right place and we have all the personnel that we need. One thing we can guarantee, this isn't going to happen during a convenient time. And so if it's in the middle of the night, making sure we've got our communication lines set up, working with Patty and our DOC on making sure we're calling everybody in and got everybody in the right positions, because once we've got everybody in the right positions and we've got our lines of communication figured out, then information can really start flowing and we can start getting things done. Something that's important that I like about the EOC is we're all, folks in the red vests are all sitting together, so I can directly talk to Neil about, where are we looking at putting these shelters up? And that's going to constantly change as he's getting new information, and I'm feeding it to him, and I can make sure Patty and our DOC are well informed about that, so we can divert their resources to go and inspect and look at those facilities first. Sitting right next to Chu as well, because making sure we can feed all the information we have on the public facilities to him and coordinate again with all of our other partners. And so again, making sure everybody's in the right place and that we're deploying people and got those information lines flowing, because information is what we need in these incidences.
Two quick hits. I'm going to really limit your time on this, so I apologize in advance. I want to hear from NAP, who's got a great deal of infrastructure that you're worried about in environmental services, and I just want to understand what's going on for you while all of this is taking place.
So environmental services manages essentially two DOCs, one for municipal water system and the wastewater facility. So on the municipal water system side, certainly we're 24 hours, people on call. They'll be in assessing the water system, coordinating with San Jose Water, as well as Great Oaks, who actually have the majority of the service area in the San Jose, determine whether or not we need to boil water or anything like that, and we will relay that information back to the EOC to thus get that out. On the wastewater facility side, depending when this happens, as Matt just alluded to, we're staffed 24 hours, so our primary thing is to look at the structures, are we operating properly, but also power. Power is the big thing. We need to keep the wastewater moving, and that actually, I said, where DOT comes into play, because actually if the sewage needs to get to us first. So DOT will be out there at the pump stations making, those are still operating, they're fueled. Once we get it, we're good, as far as power is concerned, because we generate the vast majority of it on-site. We have backup generators that we can run if that goes out, and we'll be communicating with EOC on whether or not we need more fuel to keep that going at worst case scenario. Worst case scenario is, quite frankly, we let the place flood. We let the facility flood before we let it out in the bay. Yeah.
Thank you. And then going to the very important whole community function around CERT, Community Emergency Response Team. And really, I want you to help us think about how you and we are thinking increasingly about the very important role of our community and community leaders.
All right. Good morning, everybody. So CERT, for folks that don't know, it's a community emergency response team. It's a 20-hour FEMA disaster preparedness training that teaches residents to help themselves, their family, and their neighbors. This past year alone, we had about 326 residents that have graduated through this program.
And for contrast, how many more is that than 2 years ago?
0. So
0 to 326.
Right.
Okay, just checking.
Yes. So as a result of that, in this scenario, since we now have over 326 residents that have been trained, besides communicating with me, just to be ready to assist in areas that they've also been trained in, whether it's a knock and talk, and disseminating resources or assisting in local assistant, or in our local assistance center.
Yeah. And those folks are all formally part of our system now. They're sworn in as disaster service workers, and we're going to be using them increasingly, especially as we build this capacity as a more formalized, integrated part of our response. The one thing that I will do before I turn over to the city manager, go ahead.
Yeah, just so Kip, I wanted to just go back on a point because I think it was really important when Neil was talking about what we would probably do in terms of looking at open spaces for really sheltering, because I think in this type of scenario, that's probably what we would do. And just connecting dots and reminding everyone, we have actually quite a bit of opportunities there. The city owns 3 golf courses. We have regional parks like Cunningham. The county has regional parks. We have a regional airport. There are opportunities that we would actually be counting on our partners to help and look to these massive open spaces. We have a closed golf course across from Lake Cunningham. So private properties would also be employed in terms of finding these open spaces to set up.
Thank you. Good addition. The one last piece I want to draw before I turn it over to Lee to take us through the last module and make sure we have some time for public comment is the notion of opportunity cost. And then this. This is a really remarkable team. I'm very, very proud to be a part of this team. And when this team is working, they're not doing all the other things that you expect them to do, which is a very, very long list of complicated things. And so I think the point that needs to be clear is that we have the capability increasingly and capacity to respond to an event like this. We do not have the capacity to respond to an event like this and do everything else that we were doing along the way. This is a real big investment in the organization, and we're going to need, in a case like this, to have some really clear dialogue with you around what shifts in terms of our prioritization and what we're able to do and not able to do. Even in these relatively small events, we're seeing that again and again as being one of the major constraints. And the last thing I want to close in, and I'll hand it over to Lee, is I believe that the way we do the work is as important as the work that we do. If you've ever been trained in a martial arts, you talk about the do or the way of the martial art. So you have like Taekwondo as the way of the hands and feet, or Bushido as the way of the warrior. So the notions around how this is done are important. I believe we're beginning to evolve a San Jose way, a San Jose do, if you will. And it has 3 principles that we've derived from our experience over the last 2 years. First one is we need to be compassion in action. We need to really feel and understand the reality of our community, and we need to demonstrate that through our action, not just through our words or through our sympathy. So that if we have a way that we fail, we fail toward the proactive. We fail with a bias toward action toward those most in need. Second, we need to be open, candid, and direct. We are a very polite organization. We are a very civil organization. I value all of that. In these instances, we need to turn the dial up on courage and make sure that we're able to have the conversations, which are sometimes hard, but are based on what we're really saying, and not sort of try to hide the truth one way or the other, or sugarcoat it in a way because we don't want to offend. So sometimes this means we will be direct in a way that can feel difficult, but it is because we want to be clear and true in a time of crisis. And the last one and most powerful one is this is one team. This all the way back, everybody in the public comment area, DOCs, EOCs, council, this is one team. And the reporting structure goes out the window in terms of normal day-to-day, and we become one clear team with the community. And we have to manifest all 3 of these principles in the way we work if we are going to be successful in bringing out the best in our people when the city is in the worst of times. With that, I'll hand it over to Lee to give him about, a hot minute to go through what was going to be 30 minutes of dialogue. And then we're going to create some time to close and public comment. Lee.
Thank you, Kip. So I'm going to change this up on the fly a little bit. As you heard, Kip and I are very proud of this team. We're very proud of what we've been able to accomplish. We're very proud to be a part of the team. And I think, having spent a great deal of my career on the 18th floor, I'm empathetic to the position you guys are in, where you often only hear the negative. So I wanted to start with a brief story that some of us have been able to hear and be a part of, but I think it's good to kind of reflect as an organization and including you what we've been able to do. In December of this past year, an emergency management firm and consulting firm named Witt O'Brien called, and those that you're familiar with that name, I'll say why it is familiar in a second, but they were curious how we dealt with the public safety power shutoffs. They have a number of clients throughout the state who are hearing, God, we just had a mess in our city. We didn't know what to do. And so we met in December in Dave's conference room, about 6 executives and Ray and his whole team, and we showed them the San Jose way, what we did. This included many of the things that we talked about, but the outward-facing website that was populated by our own residents, by the police officers flying the PD helicopter that night, to council members reporting in, yeah, my house just lost power, which was in real time. It also included, and I timed this on one of our night shifts, a piece of information coming into the EOC, it being disseminated, verified, and Facebooked live in English, Spanish, Vietnamese in 18 minutes and 12 seconds. We also showed him, which I think is one of the most powerful slides of the whole day, the picture of our 3 members of our council doing a press conference, speaking to our entire community. And to see their reaction, I mean, their jaw literally hit the floor. And their first response was, my God, when we did your after-action report for the Coyote Creek flood in 2017, we would have never thought a jurisdiction could have made this much progress. And that progress, any large organization's success, is based on people, teamwork, and partnerships, and focus. And all often than not, you guys hear the negative comments and don't get to have that positive feedback. And you've entrusted a lot in us in the way of one-time resources that have allowed us to do these things that you've seen today. So on behalf of the team, thank you for that. One of the important things from that after-action report was 243 kind of high-level policy recommendations that we were supposed to implement. And just going through quickly, over the course of the last few years, Kip and Ray and his team, we've been able to kind of hone those down through the emergency management roadmap and be super focused around these 4 objectives. And focusing in on these 4 objectives to increase our capabilities. And a lot of those capabilities, as you read on the slide, are a direct result of kind of the positive feedback that you've given us today, but the ability to liaison with you, communicate to the public, all of the different planning that we've been able to do. So, we've come a long way. We still have a long way to go. In the interest of time, I'm going to just skip over a few of these. I wanted to go into detail of what's been happening from year to year and where we really need to get to, which is what Kip and I say is quake ready within the next 3 years. So an awful lot of work, but some of the highlights, the after-action report, moving the Office of Emergency Services and rebranding that within the manager's office, as well as starting that draft emergency operations plan, as well as the additional one-time resources, has really allowed us, through 17 into 18 to get to a level of where we are now. In 2018, we adopted the emergency operations plan, which is really important, as well as started a lot of the annexes and finished them. The CERT program was launched. And last year, we introduced AB 291, which I'll talk about in a second. And then we were able to activate the Emergency Operations Center around our power vulnerability plan. And that's really helpful for all of us. As much as it is hard to go work a 12-hour shift, this is kind of work where you feel it. Like you are nervous, like, wow, this is a big responsibility. And the more that we're able to activate and train around this, it really brings this team into one team and allows us to kind of feel at ease with some of the responsibilities. Planning is important. We don't have the ability to just draw up new plans once we get into the Emergency Operations Center. We obviously have the capability to do that, but the more we have plans, and those annexes to speak to these type of things, we can move much more quickly in support of our community. And so Ray and his team, as well as several other people in this room, have done a tremendous job of finishing these annexes and nearly being done with a lot of these operational plans over the last few years. The capabilities it brings with communicating to our community, as Aurelia mentioned, 326 CERT graduates, as well as on the staff side, almost 200 of us have been through the Essentials of Emergency Management training, which is a 4-day, really intensive training that's position specific for a number of us. So, you know, we do have more to do, obviously. To be quake ready. Obviously, as an organization that will continue to be resource challenged and we need to be creative, you know, this team will continue to do the best that we can with the one-time funding available and to be clever. But as you've heard, a lot of this is our partners, relying on our partners in the federal and state government as we move forward in the way of resources and what their own capabilities are. We continue to be focused in around supporting our employees, including you guys, and supporting our community. And those will be the two driving forces that inform what type of resources we ask for, whether it's from you, the state, federal government, as well as the plans that we put forward. You know, part of this is experimentation. It's been great to get CERT back up and on the ground, but as we know, we have communities that have different needs. And so experimenting beyond CERT and how we train our community is going to be an important step, and we're piloting things this year to do that. On the way of opportunities, one great announcement. So last year, Benna and her team with Assembly Member Chu introduced Assembly Bill 291. Happy to report that as of 30 minutes ago, that bill was actually voted off the Assembly floor and is moving into the Senate. So very exciting, and I think it speaks to how emergency management isn't just the responsibility of Ray and his team. It's a cross-agency function for all of us. Can't speak to the importance of this bill. It would guarantee ongoing funding from the state for emergency management. This has been a 2-year bill. We're in the 2nd year of that, the legislative cycle, and it's a complicated bill. It takes money that would previously be given to partners and go through a very rigorous process and allocates a certain amount of that directly to cities. And directly to cities to plan and inform high-risk zones with vulnerable populations. And so this bypasses some of the more formal lines of emergency management and gets it directly to cities to do this work, which, as we've seen from the power safety shutoff and the flooding and other events, that cities are taking on a huge burden of this emergency management responsibility. And I think in the interest of time, just really quickly, a lot of this, as you know, we tried to do Assembly Bill 291 with Ray because we've had success over the last year. So even through the state budget process last year, mobilizing around the budget process to help Measure T with the Emergency Operations Center, but fully build that out. So this team has the facility and the resources that it needs to move forward. So that's an additional opportunity, and we'll be seeking much more of a strategy in our political processes around the state budget to bring in those resources for you and this team. And with that, I will hand it back to Kip. I think I went fast.
No, you did great. And I'm actually going to hand it back over to our city manager and then the mayor to close in respect of time and the need to make some space for public comment. And again, just a deep admiration for the team that you see here, and there are multiple shifts, and this is actually just the tip of the spear of a very powerful organization that is dedicated to this response. So thank you for this opportunity to serve you. It is one of truly the honors of my career and my life to be in this position of service to you.
Yeah, thanks, Kip. Great job, everyone. I'll be extremely brief, just basically where I started off. We said we were going to be relentless. We will continue to be relentless on this effort, and I think what we went through today demonstrates that commitment to our community. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the excellent presentation. I know Councilmember Esparza asked if she could say a few words.
Yes. First, I just wanted to thank the city manager and the whole team for the tremendous amount of work that has gone into this in the past couple of years. I see it. I see it from 2017. I'm sure others see it, and it's a great experience to be here and see that. So thank you for that. And just 2 other quick comments is
you know, the other day the mayor was talking about the importance of the census. And when we see the slide with the bill and the reimbursement and the housing needs and the recovery needs, it just, again, it highlights the importance of making sure that everybody's counted. And, you know, this is just another context in which that's important. And then lastly, I wanted to request that as we move forward, that we have open dialogue around the use of public spaces. I think that there are a lot of, having a little bit of experience with this, there are a lot of assumptions around what is usable and not usable, and there's reasons why we don't use like our arena and why it's really not an ideal place for mass shelter or stadiums, and limitations that we have here in San Jose that maybe they didn't have in Houston, and also be very upfront about the use with the county and talk with the county about the use of both city and county spaces, because one of the things that happens a lot is we all write plans and we all write our own plans, and sometimes we share information and sometimes we don't. And so sometimes different entities are counting on the use of that building or open space, and they're not telling everybody else. And so when the disaster hits, we could be at cross purposes. And so I just wanted to bring that up. Thank you.
A member of the community wanted to speak, Reverend Rowan Fairgrove.
Right here.
Hi, thank you so much for this presentation. It's been really interesting, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing. You'll probably be unsurprised to hear that I want to talk a little about disability access issues and just some things to think about. If we're sheltering in place without power after Loma Prieta, my neighborhood in D3 didn't have power for a week, how does our medical equipment get charged? And if we do have shelters, is the venue accessible to those who don't drive? How are we going to get people to the shelters? And when they get there, is the shelter going to be accessible? And I know when you put up lots of cots and things with your 36 inches in between them, the people who are going to live in them for the next few weeks start putting all their gear around it, and pretty soon there isn't access. So it's really important to me that every shelter has someone who's making sure that at least the pathway to the bathroom, at least some which have to be accessible, and the pathway to the services provided by the shelter are kept accessible. And when power's out, again, charging devices, if the building has an elevator, are people who can't use stairs going to be disadvantaged? How about refrigerators for medicines that need refrigeration? How are service dogs going to be accommodated? Are there service dog relief areas near the shelter? Will there be multiple languages? We have 8 languages on our ballot, and it's wonderful to hear that you had 3 languages during the power outages, but that leaves 5 of the languages on our ballot not covered, and plus ASL. And are there going to be Braille typewriters, you know, to type things so that the people who are blind can access it? Telephone interpretation in different languages can really work, but shelters are often really loud. And so having a quiet room, perhaps, to have interpretation in would be really good. And shelter workers, okay, I'm done. So lots of issues. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Reverend. And of course, we haven't resolved all the issues, as you clearly articulated, and I think we all know that there are many, many needs to address in a large and complex city like this. And facing what we know are some known knowns and some unknowns, and we have to prepare for all of them. And so I just want to say first, reiterate what Kip said. I'm very proud to be part of this team and to see how much progress has been made over the last couple of years, and how we are starting to really set the standard in a significant way. And I just want to thank everyone for the work they put into this exercise, and I know the work that you're continuing to put in every day to ensure that we're ensuring that we have a city that is safe and prepared. So thank you, everyone. We look forward to the work in the weeks ahead. Meeting's adjourned.